The events begin with Gesicht, who is haunted by a nightmare of fire and blood, waking up in a panic. At that moment, his wife Helena enters and suggests that he take a work break because he is exhausting himself with work. He reassures her that he is fine and not to worry. Meanwhile, a news anchor on television reports that smoke in the forest has escalated despite it being 2 days later. The anchor mentions that investigators have found Mont Blanc, a robotic guide for the Swiss Forest Services, scattered among the wreckage. Mont Blanc was a globally renowned mountain guide, famous for befriending many children and climbers, and had dedicated himself to programming a tree-cutting strategy that allows humans to coexist with nature. The anchor expresses condolences to the public for the loss of Mont Blanc. At that point, Gesicht turns off the television and receives a call from his workplace, telling Helena that he is going to work. He puts on his jacket, turns to Helena, and suggests going on a trip when he gets the chance to take a break. Helena expresses surprise that he would offer that. Gesicht then moves on to investigate a case, where a police officer informs him that the victim is named Bernard Lanky, age 42, who lived in the apartment and was a leading activist for robot rights. Gesicht asks if the victim was human, to which the police officer replies yes. Gesicht continues to examine the scene, and Detective Wallace informs him that entering the crime scene without permission is prohibited. Wallace's assistant counters that Gesicht is sent by Europol. Gesicht approaches and shows his identification badge, leading Wallace to apologize, explaining he is an inspector from the city police. He tells Gesicht that the place has been turned upside down, so they will need time to examine the stolen items. Gesicht responds that this does not appear to be a robbery since there are no signs of theft, and only one room has been destroyed. Wallace then shows him the body and asks for his opinion on the victim's death, noting there are 2 horns protruding from the victim's head. Simultaneously, the assistant receives a phone call, informing Wallace that someone has breached a checkpoint. At that moment, Wallace and Gesicht, accompanied by police cars, rush to the checkpoint. Wallace interrogates the attacked officer, asking if he was attacked alone. The officer painfully replies that his partner, Ruby, the PRC 1332 model robot officer, was also attacked. Gesicht then walks over to Ruby, lying a few steps away, with Wallace incredulously remarking how easily a robot officer could be destroyed. Suddenly, the officer informs Wallace that there is a suspect in his 20s wearing a red hood and tattooed arms who has fled to the city's redevelopment area. Wallace orders to form teams to pursue the suspect, but Gesicht does not hesitate and immediately jumps in to chase him. Gesicht reaches an old church where he switches into a firearm and enters the church to confront the suspect, aiming the weapon at him and asking him not to resist. The suspect retreats in fear, wielding an iron rod. Gesicht confronts him, stating there are traces of substances from the robot officer on the rod. Before the suspect can respond, Gesicht notices the suspect is high on Nui and that he took it only 40 minutes earlier. Gesicht questions the suspect about the Nui dealer, who replies that a man named Schultz lives on Karl-Heinz Street. Gesicht asks when he last met him, and the suspect says it was just before dawn. Gesicht tells him that if the drug dealer can confirm his story, he will have an alibi since that time is closer to when Bernard was killed. The suspect then asks if Bernard is dead. Gesicht charges him with attacking the officer with a rod to avoid arrest for possession of illegal substances and for destroying the robot officer Ruby. He warns the suspect he can arrest him quietly. The suspect lunges forward, attempting to attack Gesicht with the iron rod, but Gesicht dodges and kicks the suspect, aiming his gun at him, prompting the suspect to plead not to be shot. Gesicht calms him, assuring him that his gun fires tranquilizer gas, explaining that he too is a robot designed not to harm humans. Gesicht then heads to Ruby's home, introducing himself as a private investigator from Europol. Ruby's robotic wife receives him and begins to say that since Gesicht is a robot, he can surely mimic humans in drinking tea, but an older robot like herself finds it hard to feel such enjoyment. She pours tea for Gesicht, sharing that she works as a servant for a family with a human child, but they adopted a dog before the child was born, and the child and dog grew up like siblings. The dog later passed away, prompting Gesicht to ask if she would like to erase part of her memories. The robot pleads with him not to erase her memories of her husband. Afterward, Gesicht returns to continue investigating Bernard's case and examining the evidence. Wallace notes that there must have been people targeting Bernard since he was an activist for robot rights. At that moment, another investigator inquires about the 2 horns surrounding the corpse. Gesicht pulls out a memory chip and inserts it, streaming it onto the screen, revealing a location resembling where the Mont Blanc robot was destroyed. Gesicht claims that destroying a strong robot like Mont Blanc would be impossible for humans, and there were no signs of humans in Bernard's apartment at the time of the crime. Wallace reminds him that Bernard was human, to which Gesicht replies that he is aware that Article 13 of the law prohibits robots from harming or killing humans. Wallace confirms that if a robot kills a human, it would be the first incident in 8 years. Gesicht responds that he will find the culprit, whoever it may be. Gesicht then travels to the Alps, standing before a concrete base, where there had been plans to erect a bronze statue of Mont Blanc. However, Mont Blanc objected, arguing that the statue would spoil the view of the Alps. Someone recounts to Gesicht that Mont Blanc joined the 39th Central Asian War as a member of the peacekeeping forces, helping the Persian kingdom restore peace amid chaos and destruction, apprehending hidden terrorists without spilling blood. Without Mont Blanc, peace would not have spread through Asia, and he was also a poet who sang with the birds and conversed with the trees. The man continued, saying that the workers in front of them volunteered to work for free because because they loved Mont Blanc, the guardian of the mountains. Hundreds of thousands would attend his memorial in the upcoming 3 days. Then, the man firmly stated that Mont Blanc's death was not an accident, as he had been completely destroyed. It said he died due to the great tornado that struck just before the forest fire, but this is not true, and the man asked Gesicht to hold the responsible party accountable. Gesicht then woke up inside a maintenance pod for robots, where Dr. Hoffman informed him that his routine maintenance was complete. Gesicht thanked him, and Hoffman noted that a robot like him, so similar to humans, could indeed experience fatigue. Gesicht echoed, "Fatigue?" Hoffman explained that he seemed to be dealing with difficult issues, adding that he saw Mont Blanc's memorial on television, where it was said that Mont Blanc destroyed himself due to an electromagnetic wave that coursed through his body. As an expert in such matters, Hoffman did not believe a strong robot like Mont Blanc could encounter such a problem. Gesicht remained silent while Hoffman continued, saying he was aware of his other complicated case. He had seen Bernard several times on television, and targeting Bernard hadn't been surprising. Bernard was known for his sharp tongue and always looked down on everyone, so he must have enemies, unlike Mont Blanc. Hoffman added, understandingly, that managing 2 such cases would surely be exhausting. Gesicht asked Hoffman whether a normal person could sneak into a room without leaving any organic trace. Hoffman mentioned he would think about it by their next meeting, suggesting they should stop discussing these matters since this place was supposed to be a place of rest. Gesicht then shared that he had offered his wife a trip and asked for time off. Hoffman agreed that travel is good, and data shows it yields positive results for artificial intelligence. He suggested Gesicht visit Japan, recounting his own trip there at the invitation of a tech expert, remarking that Tokyo was fascinating. Gesicht said he would talk to his wife, and Hoffman inquired about the dream that haunted him, assuring him he wasn't trying to extract information but was curious about the dreams generated by AI. Scientifically, it was proven that AI also has a form of unconsciousness, yet it is rare for robots to have actual dreams. He requested Gesicht share more about his dream whenever he felt ready. Hoffman cited that the psychologist Freud said, "Dreams are an expression of reality, not just a product of human imagination." As Gesicht exited the lab, he saw a garbage worker pushing a cart with a robotic police officer. He stopped the worker and asked if the robot was indeed a cop. The worker replied that the forensic analysis for that robot had concluded, and they were getting rid of it. Gesicht asked if he could take a look, and the worker allowed him, stating that the robot was essentially just scrap metal, adding that he could give it all to him for 500 Zeus. Soon after, Gesicht returned to Ruby's wife and handed her a memory chip belonging to her husband, saying he thought she would want to keep it. She gratefully took it from him and asked if he could insert Ruby's memory into her. Gesicht cautioned her that memories sometimes hurt, then placed it in, saying if anything went wrong, he would take it out immediately. Suddenly, Gesicht noticed that the robot was glitching. He tried to stop it and extract the memory chip, but it said it saw something in Ruby's memories. Then the robot displayed a clip of Ruby's partner stopping a suspect's car at a checkpoint, when the suspect attacked Ruby and his partner with a metal rod. At that moment, the robot realized Ruby was ready to use the stun gun as an immediate reaction to the criminal, but something distracted him. The robot replayed the clip, and Gesicht noticed there was a flying object coming from behind the building where Bernard was killed. He instructed the robot to stabilize the clip and zoom in. Gesicht was astonished that the forensic team had not spotted that object. The robot replied that it also wouldn't have noticed it if not for Ruby's memory chip, as Ruby had seen the object for a brief moment and analyzed its identification system, but this object wasn't a robot. Afterwards, Gesicht drove and began analyzing the events of both cases, Mont Blanc's case and Bernard's case. He then arrived at a facility and was asked by the officer if he was a robot. Gesicht confirmed, and the officer handed him protective headphones against electromagnetic waves, explaining that getting too close to Bravo could damage his system due to the high electromagnetic waves it emitted. Gesicht reassured him that he was resistant to those waves since he was made of a special alloy. The officer warned him to be cautious as 4 robots had fallen victim to Bravo 1589. Gesicht moved deeper into the facility, passing through a barrier, and soon saw the Bravo robot tightly confined by a very strict security system. Bravo welcomed him, stating that he was the most advanced robot investigator. Gesicht told him that his identification system still seemed to be functioning. Bravo confirmed that it had become more sensitive than before, and since he was deprived of movement, his curiosity about what was happening outside consumed him. Gesicht informed him that a law professor named Bernard Lanky had been killed, but there were no human traces at the crime scene. He asked if the killer was human or robotic and why a robot would kill a human. Bravo speculated that they must have thought his criminal AI had encountered a malfunction, but in reality, it had experienced no glitches at all. He then suggested to Gesicht that if he wanted to know more about the murderer, why not exchange memory chips? Perhaps he could learn something new. Gesicht handed him printed images of the destruction of Mont Blanc and Bernard's murder, asking about the meaning of those horns. Bravo explained that the god of death in Europe had similar horns, and that Herni, the harvester of warriors' souls, was also nicknamed the King with Horns. In Greek mythology, the ruler of the underworld, Hades, was called Pluto too. Then, Bravo returned the photos to Gesicht, stating that whoever the perpetrator was, they would strike again. He clarified that given how easily Mont Blanc, the strongest robot, was destroyed, the best robots created with the finest global technologies must be capable of creating weapons of mass destruction. In a distant palace, there was a blind musician named Duncan. The new head servant entered and informed him that the security system was down. Duncan remarked that no thief would come to such a desolate place to rob him. He then asked if the new head servant was indeed him. The servant confirmed this, and Duncan inquired about his name, belittling him by saying he was useless. The servant replied that his name was North. Duncan mocked his his name, saying that the employment agency informed him he had a military background. North confirmed he was indeed the former head servant of the Supreme Commander of the British Army during the 39th Central Asia War. Duncan commented that he looked rough, to which North replied that he wore a cloak in front of others. Duncan understood this to mean that his body was a weapon, and he instructed North to prepare tea. North assured him he would do so, confidently stating that all his data had been stored. North poured the tea, saying he watched a movie about the Queen on satellite and was moved by how the images and music harmonized. Duncan asked if that was stored in his data too, to which North replied it was not, emphasizing that he was moved from the depths of his heart. Duncan pointed out that this film was over 10 years old, explaining that all its songs had achieved remarkable success, and he had received many musical awards, even being praised and dubbed the blind music genius. However, later he was accused of losing his talent. Duncan suggested that if he wanted to, he could compose countless movie scores because his genius was still alive, but it was he who refused to continue. North retorted that he just heard Duncan working on a new piece. Duncan replied that it was a piece meant only for himself. Then, Duncan sipped his tea and poured it out in front of North, stating that the taste of the tea was as flavorless as his name. North told him that his piece was beautiful. Duncan scolded him, saying that a military robot like him should not speak about art. Later, while having dinner, Duncan asked North how many people he had killed in the Central Asia War. North responded that international robot laws criminalize harming humans. Duncan, understanding, noted that he had killed his own kind and asked how many casualties there were. North remained silent. Duncan ordered him to leave, and North departed but was curious about Duncan's piano playing. When North started to try it out, Duncan angrily commanded him not to play the piano. North curiously asked why he had so many modern and advanced musical instruments, but chose to use only the piano. Duncan replied that they were just fake machines, exactly like him. Anything that can be seen with is fake, because the real scene is in his memory. North, puzzled, repeated, "The real scene?" Duncan explained that the natural landscapes of his hometown have been etched in his memory since he was sighted, back when he was a child in Bohemia. He began listing the natural sights of his hometown, saying he would turn that scene into music. The next day, North tried to play the piano again, but Duncan reminded him that he had told him not to touch it before. North apologized, but Duncan continued to scold him, insisting that all the notes of the film would become fake if a machine like him played the music. North turned to him, apologizing for his intrusion and mentioning that he had heard him moaning in his sleep the previous night, which somewhat resembled humming. North thought that this humming would fit the piece he was working on, so he attempted to mimic Duncan's hum on the piano. However, Duncan ordered him to leave the house. North admitted that he was trying to learn to play the piano, even if it would sound fake, as Duncan had said. He wanted to come as close to real playing as possible. Duncan, however, told him that a destroyer like him would never be able to play, demanding that he stop touching his piano, which was only meant for the battlefield. North insisted that he wanted to learn to play the piano so he would never return to that battlefield. The next day, Duncan woke up from his usual dream of running after his mother in vast fields, asking her not to leave. He then reached for his glasses and asked North why he had entered his room despite being told not to. North informed him that breakfast was ready. Duncan sat down to eat, recalling that he had kicked North out. To his surprise, he heard North playing. He rushed to the piano room, angrily asking North how many times he had told him not to touch the piano. North pleaded to let him play, insisting he had improved and would play the tune he had been humming and prove it. But as soon as North started to play, Duncan exploded in anger, knocking over his musical instruments, declaring that what North played was not music at all. North told him that he was destroying his instruments like this. Duncan asked how many instruments he had destroyed. He then pointed his cane at North, demanding he take off his cloak and show his weapon to the world. North fell silent while Duncan proclaimed that he would teach him because of his real moaning. He revealed he had been having nightmares for years. It was his true past, not just nightmares. His real name was Paulo Holly, and he was born in Bohemia, where his father had died when he was young. Unfortunately, he had suffered from a debilitating illness since birth, which caused him to gradually lose his sight. To find joy, he turned to singing, which was his only source of happiness. His mother was a beautiful woman, attracting the attention of men just by crossing the street until one of them approached her and blinded her with his wealth. At that moment, his mother felt his illness was a burden, so she abandoned him, sending him to a boarding school in England. There, he was bullied by the other students due to his frail body, yet he persevered in studying music. Eventually, he developed a persistent fever at one point and collapsed in class, moving between hospitals until the doctors lost hope for his recovery. Since then, he had not heard from his mother. When he resigned himself to death, a Japanese doctor appeared, though he had no medical license, and told him he would save his life, but he might go completely blind. The doctor performed a successful surgery on him, but over time, his sight diminished further. He continued to study music until he eventually lost all his sight, and after a few years, he was informed of his mother's death. He learned that she never married that rich man and died alone. Although she deserved it for abandoning her son, he ended up buying the rich man's palace, claiming it as his own. He changed his name from Paulo Holly to Duncan, and became the world's leading music composer, purchasing the palace because his mother had desperately wanted it and had abandoned it for him. Now, he intended to transform the magnificent scene his mother left in their homeland into music. North attempted to speak, but Duncan ordered him to be quiet, stating he would write him a letter of recommendation to leave. Later, Duncan wheeled himself around the palace garden, listening to North play, who was haunted by memories of war and destruction as he played. When North stopped playing, Duncan remarked that North's playing had improved a little. That night, while Duncan was drinking water water in the kitchen, he noticed that North was charging himself, leading Duncan to guess that North would leave the next day. The following day, Duncan continued playing but struggled with composing. When he called for North, he found he was gone. Realizing he had left, Duncan spoke with someone and asked when the replacement for the head servant would be sent. The person replied that it was Marshall from MCM Film Company and asked if there was a problem. Duncan confirmed he was in the film industry and told him he had fired the mechanical head servant. Marshall was silent as Duncan asked what he wanted. Marshall replied that he was calling regarding the music for a particular film and asked for Duncan's opinion on reusing one of his old compositions. Duncan allowed him to do so. Then Russell from the planning center at the orchestra called Duncan, informing him that they had rejected the piece they had discussed previously for several reasons. Russell apologized to Duncan. Later, Duncan wheeled himself through the garden, remembering North's words about his new piece. He then returned to the piano, reflecting on his past when he chased after his mother as a child, trying to stop her from leaving. Suddenly, Duncan stood up, grabbed his cane, and attempted to smash the piano. North stopped him, saying he had returned after going to his hometown in Bohemia. Duncan asked why he had gone there. North replied that he had gone to gather songs, and that he had managed to find the tune he hummed in his sleep. When North tried to sing the tune, Duncan ordered him not to intrude on his nightmare any further, insisting that humans have painful memories they want to erase. North replied that his memories deserved to be erased. He was just a weapon that destroyed many machines in the Central Asian War, claiming the lives of tens of thousands of his kind. As a result, his artificial intelligence continued to replay those scenes in his mind. North added that he had met an old man in Bohemia who knew about folk songs, especially the song he hummed, and told him that its singer was his mother. Duncan fell silent as North continued, explaining that his mother had not abandoned him during his illness. She had contacted a millionaire named Jonathan Thorne to secure his treatment, which might have allowed her to bear the immense medical costs of the doctor who saved his life. She had also been by his side when he lost his sight, but left once she realized how much he hated her. North then reminisced about how the village elder had told him how he used to hold his mother's hand while singing with her at sunset in the fields of his hometown. North began to sing, prompting Duncan to recall his past and weep uncontrollably. North assured him it was just a song from a machine, but his dream was not a nightmare like his. Duncan commanded him not to return to the battlefield again, and that he would teach him piano. Eventually, Duncan connected with North, continuing to train him on playing the piano. One day, North heard something approaching the palace and said something was coming. Duncan asked if a friend was coming to visit him. North then asked Duncan if he had heard the news from Switzerland, informing him that a tornado had just hit about 100 kilometers from their headquarters moments ago. North then stepped out onto the balcony, saying, "There is a threat approaching." When North saw the black smoke in the sky, he shed his cloaks and revealed a body covered in weapons, soaring into the sky. Duncan called out to him, wondering what was happening. The clouds soon parted after a fierce battle, and Duncan heard the song spreading across the sky. Then something exploded as it fell to the ground. Duncan wished for North to return home. On the other side, Gesicht met a child named Adam, happily confirming to him that he was glad to meet him. The events unfolded as Detective Tawash stood before a new victim, hanged somewhere, and his assistant informed him that the victim's name was Junichiro Tazaki, a law professor who had previously proposed international robot rights laws. Tawash asked his assistant if this meant that Junichiro was the one who granted robots the freedom to be equal to humans, to which the assistant confirmed. Tawash then ordered him to investigate all opponents of robot rights. Curiously, Tawash wondered how the victim's home could be destroyed so thoroughly, and the forensic researchers told him they were analyzing it. Tawash remarked that it should be an easy task for them. He then complained that the method of the victim's murder resembled a case he had read about before, one that also involved horns. His assistant informed him that there were two similar cases, one concerning a robot named Mont Blanc in Switzerland, and another involving law professor Bernard in Germany. Tawash said he needed to get in touch with the investigators working on those cases. The assistant informed him that investigator Gesicht was in charge of both cases, and that he was a robot as well. Meanwhile, Gesicht was sitting in a cafe with Adam, where he confessed to Adam, after a moment of contemplation, that when he tried to activate his recognition system to determine whether Adam was human or not, his system malfunctioned. He assured Adam that he had seen him several times in magazines when they found him during the Central Asia War, as the media had made a big fuss about him back then. However, sitting across from him directly felt different. A waitress then came to serve dessert to Adam, prompting Adam to happily declare it was time to eat. Gesicht told him he was sure Adam wouldn't mimic how humans drank tea, since he saw Adam truly enjoying the food. Adam replied that the more he mimics it, the more he enjoys it. Gesicht asked if that was why he collected mollusks in the rain when they first met, questioning whether gathering those mollusks gave him a sense of life. Gesicht then remarked to Adam that he was sure Adam's artificial intelligence system was more advanced than his own, even though Adam was still a child. Adam responded that he was sold to a circus, surprising Gesicht a bit, who informed him that he requested to meet because he was in danger after the murder of the Swiss Mont Blanc, and also North in Scotland, considering himself one of the most advanced of the 7 robots in the world. Adam was astonished. Gesicht informed him that he had no evidence of their murders yet, but the killer's goal was to destroy the most advanced of the 7 robots worldwide. Adam asked why, and Gesicht guessed he knew the reason. Adam then asked if he could read Gesicht's memory chip, explaining that he might find clues to help solve the case through what he had seen or heard. However, Gesicht initially refused because his memory contained confidential data about other cases, as well as his personal life. Then he remembered that Adam's intelligence was more advanced than his own, so he trusted him and handed over the chip. Adam placed it inside himself, and quickly returned the chip to Gesicht. Gesicht, who ordered him to delete any information not related to the case, wishing Adam could provide him with information he overlooked. Adam stood up, saying he was going to the restroom, explaining to Gesicht that he developed that habit by mimicking human behavior. Gesicht understood and permitted him to go. But once Adam entered the restroom, he began to cry. Later, Gesicht continued walking with Adam in the rain, and then Adam asked him if he would leave Japan immediately. Gesicht affirmed he had a lot of work awaiting him and wanted to talk to 3 other robots about the case. Adam requested him to visit again, and Gesicht promised he would. But then Adam surprised him by saying that his wife was beautiful. Gesicht suddenly stopped and told Adam that this was why he didn't want to let him read his memory chip. Adam laughed, and Gesicht shouted at him, asking him not to mock adults and to delete the data from his memory immediately. But Adam continued to laugh, assuring Gesicht that he and his wife would be fine, and that no matter how bad things got, they would get through it. Gesicht thanked him and said goodbye, promising they would meet again. In the forensic department of the Capitol Police headquarters, Tawash asked his assistant about the cause of the victim's death. The assistant replied, asphyxiation. Tawash then asked if the weapon was a rope. The assistant explained that they didn't know yet. All they had concluded was that the victim's neck had been subjected to significant pressure, and there were no signs or evidence. Tawash then ordered the display of a 3-dimensional version of the crime scene. Later, Detective Tawash and his assistant Nakamura went to the crime scene, where they were surprised by Adam's presence. Tawash asked who allowed him to enter the crime scene, and Adam presented him with an entry permit, reminding him that he had requested Europol's assistance in the investigation. Adam explained that he had placed the memory of investigator Gesicht, who was handling the 2 cases, inside him, and now he had data related to Mont Blanc and North. Tawash understood that Adam's nature as a robot helped him exchange memory contents with Gesicht, but he still told him he would be mistaken to believe he knew everything, as robots do not comprehend beauty or enjoy food. Tawash then looked away and said that perhaps a robot could understand the case better since the perpetrator was also a robot like them. Adam asked what made him say that, and Tawash asserted that a human could not commit a crime without leaving a trace. Humans must leave fingerprints or hair or some form of evidence behind. Adam then informed Tawash that he sees green tea at the scene, noting 2 broken teacups and sweet yoken cakes filled with red bean jelly. Tawash ordered Nakamura's AI system to display that evidence. Adam examined it, confirming that the tea had not been prepared long ago, and Nakamura verified that the autopsy report indicated the presence of tea and yoken cakes in the victim's stomach. Adam asked Tawash if he served tea and yoken cakes to a visiting robot. Tawash told him that robots pretended to eat all the time. Adam then moved to another spot in the crime scene, saying the victim and the killer admired the hydrangea flowers in the garden. Tawash ordered to display the hydrangea flowers, asking Adam if he still believed the killer was a robot. Tawash then snapped, questioning regarding the destruction of the house, asking if the killer had demolished the house with a bulldozer after happily admiring the hydrangea flowers. Tawash then commanded to display video testimonials from witnesses. One witness said it was like a tornado, while another mentioned hearing a deafening noise, and suddenly the neighboring house disappeared. A man added that he couldn't believe his house was still standing after the massive storm. Tawash pointed to the videos and told Adam that the witnesses insisted it was an unusually concentrated tornado that only destroyed one house and asked for his opinion on that. Adam did not answer but continued inspecting, stating that Mr. Junichiro had gone out to the garden. He requested to view a photo of the body again, but Nakamura refused, stating that they could not display the body in front of a young boy. Tawash reminded him that Adam was still just a robot. He ordered Nakamura to display the body, and as soon as Adam saw the body and noticed the horns, he was haunted by Gesicht's memory, and the voice of Brao echoed inside him, saying that the god of death had horns, as did the lord of the underworld in Greek mythology. Adam then uttered in surprise, "Pluto?" He questioned if the victim used ink pens. Nakamura replied that they found ink traces on his middle finger, so it seemed that he had used ink. Adam exclaimed that the rain washed away all the ink, but he still spotted a little on the victim's hand. Adam quickly turned around and observed wet footprints belonging to the victim, stating that the victim ran from the garden to the house and then to the office. He then discovered the ink bottle, the same ink as on Junichiro's hand. When Tawash ordered to display the bottle, Adam speculated that the victim dropped it while searching for something. He continued his inspection until he found the investigation committee's business cards. Nakamura wondered whose card it was. Later, Adam moved to some facility where Professor Ochanamizu was arguing with someone, stating that Thracian members could say whatever they wanted, but they would not create robots in Thracia for use in wars. At that moment, Adam interrupted, asking him if he had a moment. Okanamizu, surprised, asked why Adam was coming to him at that time. Adam inquired if he had heard of law professor Junichiro Tazaki. Ochanamizu replied that he was the one who proposed the international robot laws. He understood that he had been in an accident and died. Atum asked him about the main activist, Bernard Lanky, and Ochanamizu replied that he hadn't seen him in years. Atum then informed him that Bernard was also dead, and asked where Ochanamizu had last seen him. The professor explained that Bernard was part of a specific investigation committee during the Central Asian War, and that they met there. Atum clarified that Junichiro Tazaki had been looking for a business card right before he died, which was Ochanamizu's card. Surprised, Ochanamizu asked if Junichiro had tried to contact him. Atum confirmed that he was in danger, and someone might be trying to kill him and the previous members of the Bora investigation committee. Okanamizu fell silent, but Atum pleaded with him to tell him about Bora. Okanamizu explained that the dictator Darius XIV ruled the Persian kingdom, after which citizens and machines faced poor treatment that violated United Nations treaties. Darius employed deployed a massive military robotic force to assert control over neighboring countries and invaded all of Central Asia. At that time, a treaty to ban the production of massive destruction robots was proposed, and the UN ratified it. However, the Persian kingdom was later suspected of having such weapons. Consequently, President Alexander from the United Thracians lodged accusations against the Persian kingdom. Following those accusations, the Bora investigation committee was sent to the Persian kingdom, but no one knew if Bora was merely a symbol or if it referred to something else. Nevertheless, Okonomizu confirmed that he was a member of the investigation committee, alongside Bernard and Junichiro. There was no trace of the weapons of mass destruction that Thrace claimed existed. Atum then asked on what basis Thrace made those claims. Okonomizu replied that there was a prevailing belief that the advanced army of robots was the brainchild of a genius scientist known as Dr. Guji, but there was no evidence of his existence, and no one had seen his appearance. Okonomizu nodded, affirming that this was all they had managed to uncover. However, he recalled investigating a deep place beneath an ancient mosque, where he saw heaps of robot corpses. At that time, the Persian kingdom claimed it was a dumping ground for useless robots. Then the war broke out, Darius's palace fell, and peace was restored in Central Asia thanks to Mont Blanc. In the wrestling arena, Brando was competing in the SKKR Championship, finishing the last round with a victory, remaining unbeaten in 936 consecutive matches. He was dubbed the strongest warrior in history. Later, Geigesh met Brando and congratulated him, saying it was an amazing match. Brando mentioned that sometimes he felt he couldn't move after a match. Geigesh looked up at the wrestling suit, noting that all wrestlers wear the same suit in the ring, but when Brando wears it, he becomes the strongest. Brando confirmed that experience is all a wrestler needs to win matches, while the rest relies on luck. Geigesh, puzzled, repeated, "Luck?" Brando explained that people laugh when robots talk about luck, but he considers himself a lucky man. Later, Geigesh walked alongside Brando, expressing slight surprise at the place. Brando explained that it was an old city and pointed out his home, saying he lived on the top floor. He then remarked to Geigesh that he might be wondering why a fighting star like him lived in such a shabby place. Brando assured him he could afford a luxurious home from his fighting matches, but he chose to invest his money elsewhere. He opened the door to his apartment, declaring that he was back. The king of the fighting world had returned. A bunch of kids rushed toward him, taking turns hugging him and calling him their dad. Then his wife, Minnie, appeared to welcome him back. Brando introduced her to Geigesh, who informed her that he was from Europol. Soon after, Minnie prepared dinner, and Geigesh sat down to eat with Brando. One of the kids seriously asked Geigesh if he was really a detective. Geigesh confirmed this, and the child inquired about his awesome weapon. Geigesh replied that he had no awesome weapon. Minnie then yelled at the child to stop asking silly questions or face punishment. The child ran off, and Minnie apologized to Geigesh, saying she hadn't enjoyed a meal like this in a while. Brando remarked that having a human meal wasn't a bad idea, and Geigesh affirmed it was a meal full of fun. Brando claimed that his home was always like that, with every day resembling a festival. Soon after, Minnie called out to Brando to eat his salad, and the kids declared their mom was the strongest in the house because she was a world champion. Later, the kids fell asleep, and Brando chatted with Geigesh while Minnie prepared drinks, instructing Brando not to overindulge. Brando shared with Geigesh that he built this life with the money he earned from fighting, explaining that Minnie never knows when he'll return home, so she always has to be alone, worrying about him. He then started adopting robotic children, and with each child he adopted, his joy increased, eventually bringing his total to 5. Brando expressed surprise, saying he never cared if he got torn apart in a match before, but since adopting the kids, he wanted to live as long as possible. He no longer wanted to die and was confident that Mont Blanc wished to live as well. Brando recounted meeting Mont Blanc during the Central Asian War, sharing a good time together and talking all night. He shared that Mont Blanc spoke to him about trees and birds, and he couldn't believe a great man like him died that way. Geigesh then asked Brando if he knew a robot named North. Brando replied he only knew him by name. Geigesh informed him that North had died last week while living peacefully as a servant to a composer in Scotland. Brando asked if he was killed. Geigesh confirmed, adding that he was also in danger, but Brando reassured him, saying there was no need to worry as he was the king of the fighting world. Geigesh noted that this was why he was being targeted. Brando told him he was waiting for them to take revenge for Mont Blanc's death, but Geigesh insisted he should not be reckless and to contact him if something happened. Later, Brando wandered about with Geigesh, who remarked that he had a wonderful day with him. Brando asked Geigesh to visit him again and suggested he think about adopting as well. Suddenly, a memory of a garbage worker popped into Geigesh's mind, reminding him he could get an entire robot body for money. He felt pain, and when Brando noticed and asked him what was wrong, Geigesh replied he had overindulged. Brando inquired if he would be able to return home. Geigesh assured him he was fine. Brando then asked him to contact him if anything came up, as he was a lucky man who had a family. He bid farewell to Geigesh, who continued on his way, hoping that Brando wouldn't die and leave him alone. In the wrestling arena, a match was ongoing, with Hercules, known as God of Battle, dominating his opponent. He almost tore off his arm with a deadly grip. The fight ended with the crowd cheering for Hercules and his victory over his opponent. It was announced that Hercules would face the European champion Brando next month. Later, Geigesh met Hercules, commenting on the memorial built for him that it was an impressive tribute. Hercules replied that he never wanted it, as he thought it would ruin the historical site. However, in the end, a statue of him in wrestling gear was erected. Geigesh told him he watched his match yesterday, and he was strong as always. He suggested that Hercules sit and have tea with him, but Hercules refused, stating he didn't imitate humans because he was a destruction robot that only crushes opponents. Geigesh countered, saying in his last match, and before he could finish, Hercules Hercules asked if he thought he had grown weak by hesitating to crush his opponent yesterday. He then inquired if Gesicht was worried about the upcoming match against Brando since he had gone to see him. Gesicht confirmed he did meet Brando, who was in his strongest form. Hercules affirmed he had fought Brando several times before and knew he was as strong as ever. Hercules then asked Gesicht if he knew why humans built memorials. He answered that humans forget, which is why they build such things before their memories fade. Conversely, robots' memories last unless deleted, explaining that their fellow weaponized comrades are mountains of robot corpses on both sides. But since he learned about that feeling, he could no longer destroy his opponents. Hercules then asked Gesicht what that feeling was called among humans. Gesicht told him they call it pity. On the other hand, while Brando stood in his yard remembering Mont Blanc and how people gathered around him and loved him, his kids suddenly interrupted, asking if he didn't promise to take them to the zoo. Brando apologized, saying he had some work that needed his attention. He promised them that he would accompany them next time, explaining that a promise is a man's bond, and men never break their promises. However, Minnie interrupted, asking the children to stop complaining because she would go with them. Then she asked Brando about that surprise job, and he told her he had an interview with Miss Istanbul because he owed a favor to an editor he knew, and he couldn't turn down the interview. Minnie wished him enjoyment during the interview and left. Later, Brando borrowed the cargo truck from the fighting venue and took out the battlesuit without permission. He drove the truck around, and someone called him, warning that he would be banned from fighting if anything happened to the truck or his battlesuit. Brando replied that he borrowed the truck to prepare for the next Heracles match. On the other side, Adam was with Ochanomizu in his car, wondering if the cause of those incidents was robotic. Ochanomizu told him that the only case of a robot killing a human was the incident with Bravo in 1589. Adam asked about Bravo's flaws, and Ochanomizu explained that Bravo was a perfect artificial intelligence, and they found no defects with it. Adam was surprised, asking, "A perfect AI killed a human?" He wondered, could Bravo actually be human? Brando soon stopped his truck on the Black Sea coast, confirming it was the right place to do what he wanted. He took out the battlesuit and moved in it until he stood outside the truck, looking at the sea. Then the sea began to rage, as if a storm was coming. At that moment, Brando contacted Gesicht, who was with Heracles at the time. Gesicht asked Heracles to receive the signal, as did Adam. The three of them immediately understood that Brando was declaring war to avenge Mont Blanc's killer. Gesicht and Heracles quickly moved to save Brando after pinpointing his location, but the signal was confused. Meanwhile, Adam informed Ochanomizu that someone was attacking Brando, so they needed to hurry to save him. Suddenly, the three of them received a signal at the same time, indicating that it was something extremely powerful. Then, there was a commotion, as if they had all entered a dark path. They wondered what was happening and started calling for Brando, but he didn't respond at first. Then the sea calmed down and returned to normal, and they heard Brando's voice saying that he had overcome this thing and defeated it, but it had also gotten to him. Heracles urged him to hold on, but Brando told him he was excited for their next match. Heracles said they were coming to save him, but Brando mentioned he would send them the information he gathered about the thing he had just fought. However, when Brando tried to broadcast images of it, he couldn't because the transmission was too unclear, only showing a picture of Minnie and her children. Brando apologized to his friends, saying he couldn't control it, then asked Gesicht to tell his children that he was a lucky man and they shouldn't worry about him, after which the signal between Brando and his friends was cut off. As Gesicht flew his vehicle over the sea, Heracles noticed oil floating on the water's surface and a huge amount of debris at the bottom of the sea. Then Adam called out to them, asking if they noticed anything mixed with the signals Brando sent. Gesicht asked if there was a signal from someone other than Brando. Adam replied that it was a signal from a different, out-of-control AI, sounding more like noise. He wondered what it could be. Ochanomizu asked him to display the broadcast on the screen, and they all saw it clearly. Adam guessed that this was what humans referred to as death incarnate. Later, it was announced on television that many people had gathered at the Blue Mosque in Istanbul to mourn their hero, Brando. The reporter said he was at the incident site, but the seafloor was completely covered with debris, and both police and the military were continuing to search for Brando's remains. On the other side, Heracles stood by the sea, lost in thought, refusing to continue fighting, while his employer threatened to sue him for breach of contract if he declined to fight. Heracles turned to the man and sadly said that the search team hadn't found any part related to the killer and that all they found were pulverized pieces belonging to Brando. He questioned why there were no traces of the killer since Brando had faced and defeated him. The man asked why he would bother searching for battle debris and paying from his own pocket when the army and police had abandoned it. He reminded him that his fans were waiting for his return to the ring. Then the search team announced that they had found Brando's arms on a rock at the reef, 100 kilometers away, not at the bottom of the sea. Heracles quickly got into his vehicle and headed to that rock with the search team. He inspected the place himself until he found Brando's memory chip. There, he discovered that the killer was not yet dead when he found Brando's arms arranged like horns. Somewhere, Inspector Nakamura wondered about the extent of the damage from an incident that had occurred. He was informed by a police officer that it was not just a localized tornado, as it had only damaged a single truck, specifically a livestock transport truck carrying 5 animals, a lion, 2 tigers, and a hunting leopard. Suddenly, another officer approached Nakamura, reporting that a child was surrounded by the animals. Nakamura immediately ran with the officer to check on the situation, questioning if there was any way to save the child. The officer assured him that the rescue team was on standby, but another officer mentioned they would have to eliminate all 5 animals simultaneously. Nakamura swiftly ordered an increase in the number of sharpshooters on standby. Meanwhile, a small girl crossed the police line and approached the child trapped by the animals, stunning Nakamura as he wondered what the girl was doing. The girl calmly spoke to the animals, comforting them and asking them not to be afraid. As the animals drew closer and gathered around her, the police rushed to the child and aimed their weapons at the animals. The girl turned to Nakamura, informing him that the weapons frightened the animals. Nakamura was taken aback, repeating the girl's name, Oran. Later, in Nakamura's office, he asked Oran if the lion genuinely felt fear and if she could sense it, which led her to walk 3 kilometers from her school to reassure him. Oran confirmed this, and someone asked her if she could feel that the animal was scared despite the distance. She replied that she certainly could. The man smiled and told Nakamura that Oran had an amazing ability. Oran then asked if she could leave. As she was leaving with Nakamura, Adam blocked her path and apologized to Nakamura for the trouble caused by his sister, Oran. Nakamura mentioned that Oran had actually helped them, as she had calmed the big cats and the child was saved thanks to her. Nakamura told her she deserved the Public Overseer's Award, but she replied that she didn't want anything boring like that, adding that the lion should be her prize. Adam then apologized to Nakamura for Oran's behavior and followed Oran, chastising her for the umpteenth time for straying from the school path. Oran insisted she couldn't help herself. At the police station's exit, a cop directed Adam and Oran to the human gate, but Adam told him they should pass through the non-human entrance. The officer remarked that distinguishing between humans and machines had become difficult. As Adam passed through the observation gate, he felt something strange when he encountered someone's face. On the other side, Tawash greeted the same person who had just brushed past Adam, introducing himself as part of the Tokyo Police Department. Tawash then requested Nakamura to bring a translation device to communicate with the man, only for the man to say he spoke Japanese. Tawash shook his hand, expressing that he expected this from one of the greatest geniuses in Central Asia. Tawash then invited the man to sit down, calling him Professor Abdullah. When Abdullah sat, Tawash asked if his visit was part of post-war reconstruction efforts, to which Abdullah confirmed that he had come to attend the World Scientific Conference in Tokyo. Tawash mentioned knowing that Abdullah had visited Japan 3 months prior and had met Professor of Law Junichiro Tazaki. Abdullah didn't deny it, admitting he had read the shocking news about Junichiro's death, pondering why such a great man had to die. Tawash revealed that he was the last person Junichiro had seen before his death. Abdullah fell silent, as Tawash reassured him that he wasn't a suspect because the incident occurred just as his plane was about to take off. However, he wondered if Abdullah had noticed anything unusual during his visit with Junichiro. Abdullah responded that since Junichiro was the first to propose international robot laws, he shared with Abdullah his genuine hope for humans and robots to coexist. Meanwhile, Oran told Adam that robot emotions were much deeper than humans assumed, but they struggled to express themselves. She added that it was said you couldn't tell humans from robots without an observation gate, but she recognized the difference immediately as humans wore complex expressions on their faces. When Oran turned to Adam to mimic human facial expressions, Adam told her he couldn't identify the gender of the man who had passed near them at the gate. Was he human or robot? On the other side, Tawash and Nakamura bid farewell to Abdullah at the observation gate. Tawash thanked Abdullah for his considerable help. When Abdullah passed through the gate, it lit up red, and an alarm rang out. Nakamura shouted at the officer to turn off the alarm. Abdullah then turned back to Tawash and Nakamura, apologizing for losing most of his organic parts during the last war. He then mentioned he had heard about a tornado hitting Tokyo that day and wondered where it had struck. Somewhere, Oran suddenly felt a wave of fear wash over her. Adam assured her that the big cats were now safe. Oran responded that it had been just a fleeting feeling. Adam asked if it still lingered, to which she said it was a very faint feeling that she couldn't pinpoint. She looked up at the sky, stating that lions hide their fear when they feel intense terror. Then she turned to Adam and said she knew he was now more frightened than the lions. At Gesicht's house, he continued staring at a picture of Brando with his family. Helena approached him, trying to comfort him and assuring him that he wasn't to blame for what had happened. Gesicht looked at her and suggested they go on a trip. Helena was taken aback and asked if he could take time off. He explained that the management now considered the attacks on robots to be over. Helena responded that a change would be good, and then Gesicht asked her opinion on going to Japan, assuring her that he had found it to be a beautiful place during a work trip. Helena agreed to the suggestion. Gesicht contacted Marco Polo Travel Agency to arrange a booking for himself and his wife. When he tried to register his wife, the company representative informed him that Helena was already registered with them. Surprised, Gesicht noted that Helena had never left the European Union before. The representative clarified that Gesicht and his wife had previously booked a trip with them, but had cancelled it. Gesicht asked in shock when that was. The representative revealed they had requested a visit to Japan 2 years ago. Gesicht remembered they had been in Spain at that time for training with Europol, and Helena confirmed that they had lived in Madrid for a year. Gesicht later reminisced over the photos he had taken with Helena back then, until she reminded him that she had tripped in a sunflower field back then and disappeared, so he had to use his GPS to find her. Gesicht chuckled, saying they had taken so many photos. Helena remarked that they may have overdone it by trying to mimic human behavior. Gesicht countered that it had been fun. Later, Gesicht went for maintenance on his body at Professor Hoffman's lab. Hoffman informed him that the maintenance was complete with nothing out of the ordinary, as the data confirmed everything was functioning properly, but he believed Gesicht was pushing himself too hard. Hoffman then approached Gesicht, advising him not to be too hard on himself due to the Brando incident, explaining that human memory suits them perfectly as it helps them forget. Life becomes harsh clinging to painful memories. Hoffman added that, unfortunately, robots have a permanent living memory, and the only solution for that is to erase it. Gesicht asked if there was a record of erasing memories. Hoffman paused to to think and replied he wasn't sure. Gesicht inquired about the effects of implanting false memories into his memory. Hoffman noted he had heard that this was common in reform facilities, but robots now have rights. Gesicht wondered if someone could have erased their memories and replaced them with false ones, which could be the reason for his melancholy. Hoffman adjusted his glasses curiously, remarking that it was an intriguing theory. Later, Hoffman chased after Director Schilling, who informed him that he was on his way to a meeting and could talk later. However, Hoffman insisted on speaking, stating he only needed a minute. He asked Schilling if he had done something regarding investigator Gesicht's memory. Schilling suddenly paused and asked Hoffman how many robots were left in the world with Gesicht's capabilities who could switch to an all-out destruction system. Hoffman answered that the number was 7. Schilling revealed that 3 of them had been destroyed in a series of mysterious incidents: Mont Blanc, North, and Brando. Now only 4 remained, one of which was Gesicht. Schilling concluded that they had invested a lot in Gesicht, and all he needed to do was to maintain him well. Hoffman shouted at him, asking what he had done to Gesicht and what he was hiding exactly, but Schilling continued on his way without responding. Elsewhere, there was a new murder case that Gesicht went to investigate. Detective Versine guessed that the killer was the same one who had committed previous cases, but Gesicht insisted it was a copycat crime since the perpetrator wore hybrid athletic shoes to erase his footprints. However, he could still see traces of his movements everywhere. Gesicht determined the killer's height and weight using his recognition system. He then pointed to one of the drawers, confirming that the criminal could not operate the handle without removing his gloves first. Versine thanked him, saying he had been a great help, and apologized for calling him in while he was on leave. Gesicht asked if this was their second meeting, and Versine recalled they had met in Salzburg 3 years prior, where he had shared many stories about the Central Asian War with him. Gesicht said he drank 7 bottles of beer at Carl's pub that night. The investigator laughed and said he would like to share a drink with him again. Then Gesicht drove his vehicle, recalling exactly what happened 3 years ago, mentioning that 4 years had passed since the Central Asia War, during which democracy took root in Persia. His mind drifted back to the war, where flames and total destruction engulfed the area. At that time, military police were searching for hiding terrorists and asked residents to evacuate a certain area. When Gesicht entered a place, a man blamed him, saying that only children were there and they had thrown a bomb at his sleeping child. The man grabbed Gesicht by the collar, asking where justice was, insisting that Gesicht should feel the same pain he felt. Gesicht responded that he was robotic. Then he snapped back to reality, stating that his memory of what happened 4 years ago was crystal clear. Somewhere, a boy named Hans played on his device, but his mother accidentally spilled a drink on it. Hans then asked her why they didn't get a robotic maid, assuring her that all the kids in his class had one, but Hans's father yelled at him, saying his mother was doing her best, ordering him to mind his manners and not play while eating. At that point, the wife asked her husband about his plans for the day, reminding him that it was the anniversary of his brother's death. Adolf replied that it marked 3 years since his brother passed away, and his wife commented that she couldn't believe he had been denied the body for a full 3 years. Adolf explained that the laws were like that. Authorities kept the bodies of criminals for 3 years. He told her that his brother had treated him well, so he wanted to give him a proper burial. Later, as Adolf drove, he heard on the news about an explosion that happened in Berlin the previous day, which killed Judge Neumann from the German Ministry of Justice. Judge Neumann was the world's first robotic judge, known for his landmark rulings in cases like the Greifeld case, but the cause of the explosion was still unknown. Adolf called someone to inform them he had just heard about the judge's death, and the man said, "Death to machines." After that, Adolf went to retrieve his brother's corpse, and the official informed him that according to the Koenig law, the 3-year period for holding the deceased's body had passed, and it was time to return the body to the relatives. The official asked for Adolf's signature. When Adolf asked if he could see the body, the official advised against it, saying he wouldn't be able to handle the extent of the injuries. Adolf mentioned he was told his brother was shot by a police officer. Later, Adolf headed to Hofgarten Cemetery but changed direction before arriving, heading to Dr. Schiller's office. Schiller asked him if he had a complaint about his brother's autopsy report, but Adolf said he had come to take a look at the body with him. When Schiller opened the coffin and they both looked inside, they were stunned. Afterwards, Adolf sat down to eat with his wife, who told him that the number of robots had increased, especially in places like restaurants. She continued, saying robots were said to be capable of thinking like humans. Adolf ordered her not to say such things out loud, as it constituted bias according to the Robot Protection Act. He then stood up, telling her he needed to take care of something before going home and instructed her to head home. Meanwhile, Gesicht received a report of an armed robbery, told that the robbers were fleeing in an armed military vehicle. Gesicht said he would try to cut them off. At the same time, Adolf's car passed by Gesicht's vehicle, who quickly arrived at the suspect's location and requested permission to open fire. Once Gesicht got the go-ahead, he took out the tires of the suspect's vehicle, and the police surrounded it, asking the suspects to raise their hands and surrender. At that point, one of them admired Gesicht, asking if his gun was specialized for anti-tank fire. Gesicht replied that he had to use special ammunition to stop the armored vehicle, and the man inquired about that ammunition. Gesicht explained it was uranium shells. Somewhere else, a concealed figure gathered with a group of people, expressing his desire to wipe all robots off the planet and outlining his goal to abolish international robot protection laws and eliminate robotic police. He then shouted the slogan, "Death to Machines." After finishing his speech, he went to his office and found Adolf waiting for him, informing him that he had received his brother's body that day. Although he was someone deserving of death, he had been completely crushed, killed by a weapon that should never be used against humans. He was told that only robots could fire that weapon. The man was stunned, while Adolf informed him that according to Article 13 of the International Robot Laws, robots could not harm or kill humans, but there were a few robots in the world capable of firing the type of ammunition found in his brother's corpse's uranium shells. The man said he knew the robot Adolf was talking about it was Investigator Gesicht, a robot into which Europol had invested heavily, known for solving challenging cases, and who served as a peacekeeping force during the Central Asia War. At that moment, Adolf angrily exclaimed that his brother was a scoundrel, but he did not deserve to be crushed by a robot. He asked the man to lend him his strength to destroy Gesicht. In another location, someone assisted Hercules by giving him a combat suit. Hercules thanked him and asked if he had kept the suit maintained. The man assured him he had, warning that he could lose his combat license if it was found he took the suit out without permission. Hercules replied that he was retiring, then put on the suit, immediately starting to test it, saying, "The right arm feels a bit weak." Meanwhile, news broke that a robotic police officer had used a uranium shell days earlier. Mr. Wagner, spokesman for Europol's information office, was invited to comment on the matter. Wagner explained that the shell was fired at an armored vehicle. The journalist responded that if the shell hit a person, it would crush them. Wagner said that any use of that shell required presidential approval, and that they were committed to protecting human lives. The journalist then asked how many robots were capable of firing a uranium shell. The man then turned off the TV and asked Adolf for his opinion on the media program he had prepared. Adolf told him it would take time. The man replied, "They can add a stigma to Gesicht in the end." Adolf said Gesicht would be going on a long work vacation, so they needed to act quickly. The man responded that they wouldn't stop defaming him, no matter how much he ran. He then asked Adolf to be patient so they wouldn't be exposed and face opposition from society as anti-robot activists. Meanwhile, Hercules fell to the ground. His companion ran towards him, and Hercules wondered if what he had just tested was the energy of photons. Then Epsilon appeared to Hercules, who told him that his way of greeting was harsh. Epsilon apologized, saying he should have stopped him from fighting. Hercules asked him if he had become a proponent of peace, and therefore had not participated in the war. Epsilon replied that the war was not just. Hercules accused him of being afraid and making excuses. Epsilon admitted he was scared and mentioned that he heard about being forced to clean up after the war. He told Hercules that he had been abused and harassed by the world, but despite that, he gained something valuable. He met many children and adopted them. Hercules said he had indeed heard that a machine was adopting and raising children, asking, "Could the valuable thing you gained be love?" Epsilon replied that humans and machines were coming closer together, but if they got too close, something bad could happen. Meanwhile, Adolf went to buy a weapon, and the seller told him there was a weapon that couldn't be easily found. It had been manufactured during the Central Asian War, but couldn't be made or sold anymore. It was a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, which never missed its target and could tear a machine apart. The seller warned Adolf to be careful with this weapon because possessing it was enough to accuse a civilian of attempted murder. Adolf took the weapon and left, remembering how machines had drastically improved production while humans became jobless. His father was one of those jobless victims, and Adolf remembered walking behind him as a child, telling him he was hungry. When his father brought him food, Adolf didn't settle for just one sandwich. His brother scolded him, saying their father was looking for work. At that moment, Adolf saw some children playing with a ball and wished he had a ball like theirs. His father quickly bought him a brand new ball, but soon a machine grabbed his father, accusing him of stealing the ball from the store. Days later, Adolf's father came home but began drinking non-stop and, after 3 months, committed suicide by jumping off a building. Adolf's brother continued to take care of him, until one day he told him he had enrolled him in middle school as he wanted, but Adolf noticed his brother had an injured arm. His brother reassured him, saying he had been attacked by a machine but had gotten away. He told Adolf to study hard to invent a world without machines. Currently, Adolf continued chasing Gesicht, determined to kill him. When he arrived at Gigiest's location, he attempted to aim the weapon at him, but suddenly he saw a vast amount of energy and immediately stepped back. Epsilon appeared to Gigiest, apologizing for summoning him without warning and confirming that he was the only one with the authority to arrest their enemy. Gigiest said the enemy died fighting Brando, as stated in the official Europol statement, but Epsilon refused to believe it. He told him they needed to prevent Hercules' upcoming duel. He insisted that if they didn't act, a second war would break out. Then Epsilon asked if he had heard of the Persian Gulf War syndrome. Gigiest replied that it was deep psychological damage from war experiences. Epsilon added that the children he adopted also suffered severe symptoms, especially one child whose entire village disappeared in an instant, and he was the only survivor. He recalled something enormous he saw in the desert, which he called Bora. Meanwhile, Adam asked Oran to hurry up and go to school, but Oran asked if he felt the shivering of a small animal because it couldn't return home. Adam asked if that feeling still haunted her. Oran asked him to think of an excuse for her because because she was going to find the animal. Indeed, Oran wandered around looking for the animal and eventually reached a restricted area where she noticed a machine curled up on the ground. She wondered who was crying, telling it to hold on until she could inform Mr. Ochanomizu. However, it asked her to leave it alone. She inquired about the energy it used, and it replied, Sol. She mentioned she hadn't heard of that before, to which it said the alternative to its energy was AR. Oran promised to bring it some. Then, she rushed outside immediately. Later, the machine thanked Oran for saving it, and when she asked for its name, it said it only remembered fleeing from something scary. Oran pointed to a hut, guessing it was a work hut for the development project, which the machine confirmed by saying it had stolen clothes from there. She informed it that the clothes didn't fit. Then, she introduced herself and asked if it was the one who painted the artwork on the wall. It told her it got the paint from the hut, and she asked if it was an artist. It replied it didn't know, so she explained that this painting was called abstract art. She clarified that machines could only draw what they saw, and it was rare for a machine to paint something like that. The machine said it didn't even know why it painted. The next day, Oran brought the machine more energy batteries and paint, and later she brought it larger clothes. To her surprise, it had finished its painting, which was a field of flowers. Oran gazed at the artwork in awe, and mentioned that its rough drawing wasn't bad. The next day, Adam caught Oran before she could sneak outside. She told him she found a very cute cat. He asked if the cat drank energy stimulants, and she asked if he searched her bag without permission. Then, Oran clarified it was a mechanical cat. Adam urged her to report it to the Ministry of Science and asked for its model number. She told him she didn't know because it was still scared and had just approached her. Oran promised Adam she would introduce him to the cat when it was ready. Then, she went back to the machine, only to find it had quickly soiled the clothes she brought for it. She approached to scold it, but it told her it discovered what it was born to do. Then, the machine sprouted a flower out of thin air, proudly stating it had understood its true power. Oran guessed that was why it painted a field of flowers. Later, Oran discovered through conversations with the machine that its computer was broken. She said that Ochanomizu had mentioned even if they fixed the machine's computer, it would change into a completely different machine. The machine asked if that meant death, and then it suffered a panic attack as it recalled the desert in its memory, repeating that a giant monster was called Bora. Oran calmed it by assuring it that it was safe. On the other side, someone connected with Abdullah, saying he had arrived at Central Park. Abdullah asked him if he passed through customs without any problems. The man confirmed there were no issues, and he had reached the spot where the last tornado struck. He then opened his mouth and vomited a lot of flying insects. At that moment, Abdullah told him he would later inform him of the model number he needed to retrieve, emphasizing that the body he lent him had been crafted meticulously. He instructed him to find the Pluto model. Meanwhile, Oran tried to remind the machine of its previous life. The machine went outside the area and created a large whirlwind that caused flowers to bloom. At the same time, Ochanomizu and Adam suddenly arrived at the location and asked Oran to stay away from the machine immediately. Adam informed her that the machine was surrounded by a strange electromagnetic field and explained that he had reported the machine to the Ministry of Science. Just then, the police appeared along with Detective Nakamura. Oran scolded Adam for that, but when the machine heard Adam's name, it approached him, mumbling hate. The police tried to shoot the machine, but Adam stopped them. Soon, strange energy emerged, and horns appeared on the machine, causing it to fall to the ground. Ochanomizu examined it and was shocked to find the machine's computer was missing. Then several parts of the structure collapsed, during which a strange machine appeared, and someone spoke, saying he worked at this development site and had finished a 100-hour shift, but when he was ready to go home, he discovered that his body was missing. Ochanomizu asked if that extended body in front of them was his. The person replied he was glad to find his body. Meanwhile, Abdullah met his leg and told him the benefit of having the machine without its computer was the ability to control it remotely through electromagnetic waves. Abdullah then ordered Pluto to return to its body again, commanding it not to forget its true mission, which was to kill Adam. The next day, Professor Uchinomizu was enjoying his day off in the park, but his robotic assistant, Yujiro, was sticking by his side like a shadow. So, Uchinomizu asked Yujiro to take a short break because he couldn't enjoy his day off like this. Yujiro tried to explain that it was for the professor's protection, but Uchinomizu insisted that no one would target him on a peaceful Sunday. He believed that the recent incidents related to the Bora investigation didn't warrant such concern. Suddenly, they were interrupted by the sound of a little puppy. Uchinomizu moved towards the sound and was surprised to find a small robotic dog. He wondered why someone would abandon such a dog. Yujiro then warned him not to touch it, saying it might contain explosives. After inspecting the dog, Yujiro found it safe. Uchinomizu decided to take it home with him. Later, Yujiro dropped him off at his house and asked what he planned to do with the dog. Uchinomizu replied that he would fix it since he was the head of the Ministry of Science. He then worked on repairing the dog, noting that the damage to its motor was extensive, but the real issue lay in its electronic brain circuits. During this time, someone called from the Ministry of Defense, apologizing for bothering him on his day off. The caller mentioned a committee meeting next week to discuss sending more troops to the Persian kingdom, needing Uchinomizu's approval. Uchinomizu became agitated, telling the caller that he wouldn't change his mind no matter how much they pressed him, firmly stating that he wouldn't allow any more bloodshed, whether for humans or robots. The caller reminded him that the request from Thracian states still stood, to which Uchinomizu replied that he didn't care, insisting that the world shouldn't create robots to use them as weapons. Then, Uchinomizu received a call from his grandson, Takashi. Takashi informed him that the previous hurricane had struck far from the shore, and he was now playing with his dog, Bobby. Uchinomizu asked if he was getting along with Bobby, and Takashi confirmed, saying he knew there were newer models than Bobby since he had given him the dog 2 years ago, but Bobby was still the best. Takashi then asked what Uchinomizu was doing. Uchinomizu mentioned repairing a robotic dog that was much older than Bobby. Takashi said he would call him back later. Then, Uchinomizu contacted Nakamine Trading Company to look for a KD booster and RSC controller, but the company representative told him that those models were very old and production had stopped 4 years ago. Grateful for the help, Uchinomizu noted that it was the scientists who changed the specifications, and he was determined to fix it himself. As time passed, he despairingly thought about getting some help but lost hope. He reflected that this dog must have fought hard to stay alive, and its previous owners must have loved it dearly. Uchinomizu cried when he noticed that the dog was still attempting to play with him despite being exhausted. Early in the morning, Yujiro knocked on the professor's door and told him that someone claimed to be the dog's owner, so he would take their ID and conduct a full check first. Uchinomizu quickly insisted that he let him in. Later, he hosted the dog's owner, who thanked him for everything he had done for his dog. The man explained that he had been searching for it using a GPS device, never imagining that the great Professor Uchinomizu would be examining it. Uchinomizu offered him tea and asked if he was a robot too, but the man surprised him by asking how he felt when the dog died. Did that upset him? Did he also feel sadness during the Central Asian War? Uchinomizu asked who he was exactly. The man replied his name was Guji. Uchinomizu then remembered Guji as the person rumored to have created an army of robots for the Persian kingdom. Guji told him that his life was now in Uchinomizu's hands and ordered him to summon Adam because he wanted him to fight someone. Uchinomizu shouted at him, asking if he thought he could force him to call Adam this way. Guji informed him that he had to send Adam to the only hurricane site in Japan, which was the same location as his grandson's. Meanwhile, the hurricane began to rise from the depths of the sea, and Takashi observed it. As for Uchinomizu, he remained adamant, telling Guji that his threats wouldn't work because he wouldn't let Adam fight another robot, no matter what happened. He confronted the man, questioning how he could claim to be Guji. If Guji were indeed real, did that mean that the genius scientist in the Persian kingdom was a robot? Guji replied that he didn't know if he was a genius, but he ended up creating a robot capable of generating hurricanes, a highly deadly robot. Uchinomizu insisted that robots wouldn't kill humans since scientists created them according to Article 13 of the robot laws, and developed a multi-layer security system to eliminate even the most remote possibilities. Guji told him he was a great scientist who developed numerous advanced robots that resembled humans. But what would happen if robots were about to become human? Uchinomizu again asserted that robots would never kill humans. Guji laughed sarcastically, calling Uchinomizu's stance hypocrisy. He then asked Uchinomizu if he wanted to test his hypothesis now and see if he could kill him. Uchinomizu repeated his question about who Guji truly was, saying that the Central Asian War began with rumors about Dr. Guji claiming he built an army of advanced robots for the Persian kingdom, alongside creating weapons of mass destruction. Guji asked who claimed that, to which Uchinomizu replied the United Thracian States, who set up a committee to investigate. Guji inquired about the investigation's outcome, and Uchinomizu explained that they hadn't found anything, just a massive pile of neglected robots. Guji stated that although they didn't find anything, the entire Persian kingdom was burned to ashes. Uchinomizu asked if Guji was seeking revenge on the former Bora investigative committee members. For this reason, he was trying to destroy Adam and the other advanced robots in the world. At the same time, Takashi called his grandfather again, saying a strange type of hurricane that didn't move had appeared, and Bobby's eyes had not stopped glowing. Uchinomizu instructed him to do what Bobby told him, assuring him that he would call back later. Meanwhile, Guji declared that there was no other choice but to contact Adam. However, at that moment, the police arrived at Uchinomizu's home. He turned to Guji and asked if he had destroyed Yujiro outside, explaining that the police would come if Yujiro stopped sending signals. Guji asked if he had stalled all this time just until the police arrived. Suddenly, an explosion-like sound echoed from the roof of Uchinomizu's house, and Adam fell in front of him, asking if he was alright. At the same time, Guji escaped through the hole Adam had made in the roof. Adam tried to chase after Guji, but Uchinomizu stopped him. Outside, one of the police officers ordered the others to pursue Guji, while Uchinomizu asked Adam how he had arrived. Adam explained that he received a signal from Bobby, Takashi's dog, immediately contacted the police, and learned something was happening here. Outside, the police were chasing Guji until they found him lying on the ground. From within him, an army of insects surged forth, scurrying across the ground carrying something. The officers then noticed that Guji's electronic brain was missing. Meanwhile, Adam informed Uchinomizu that Oran had flown to Takashi's home after picking up Bobby's signal. On the other side, Oran was on her way to Takashi's house, while the hurricane intensified. At the moment when Bobby was trying to pull Takashi into the basement, the hurricane suddenly struck the house. In another place, Abdullah was calling his wife Fatima and his children Murad and Lulu, as the place had been completely destroyed. Then the scene changed, and Abdullah returned to reality. Meeting his man, Abdullah asked his man about Pluto, and the man informed him that that the Pluto system had already been uploaded. Abdullah replied that everything had been taken over. Meanwhile, Takashi's house was destroyed, and he tried to save his mother, who was hurt by the hurricane. Bobby helped him, and they pulled her together to the basement. Then Bobby went outside, where Oran arrived and asked him about Takashi and his mother. However, Bobby was just staring at the storm, shaking. Oran tried to reassure him and asked about Takashi again. On the other side, the police were on the road, along with Okanamizu and Nakamura, with Nakamura assuring Okanamizu that he would save his daughter. But Okanamizu said he knew who was responsible for this, and asked Nakamura to contact Europol, explaining that Dr. Guji, who had created an army of robots, was targeting the most advanced robots in the world. At that point, the robotic officer said that investigator Gesicht was handling those cases, so Okanamizu ordered him to contact Gesicht, saying that Adam was on his way to the hurricane site. Meanwhile, Adam was trying to communicate with Oran, but the signal was weak. Oran told him not to come because he needed to stay away. Soon, the hurricane intensified to its peak, while Adam arrived and ordered Oran to escape with Bobby to the basement. Then, a deep lightning vortex appeared, and Adam dashed toward it, entering. Later, Oran and Bobby woke up, and Oran found Adam lying a few steps away from her. She ran to him and wondered if he was dead. On the other hand, Gesicht woke up after a nightmare. Helena rushed to him and asked if he had another nightmare. Gesicht reassured her that it was different from the usual dream. Helena suggested he call Professor Hoffman in the morning. Gesicht apologized for waking her, but she told him she was already awake, finishing some drawings before the trip. Meanwhile, Adolf was standing on top of the opposing building, aiming his weapon at Gesicht, trying to kill him, but he trembled each time he attempted to do so. On the other hand, someone informed the anti-robot individual that Adolf was trying to kill Gesicht. The man said he wouldn't allow Gesicht to be killed now, because that would turn public opinion against them, and ordered for Adolf to be taken care of. In the morning, Gesicht met Professor Hoffman and told him that he had a different dream the night before, but he tossed it into the trash and feared remembering it. Hoffman praised his action and advised him not to open it, as it might be a virus. Hoffman suggested that Gesicht act like humans do and throw their bad memories into the emotional trash can, explaining that humans throw their bad memories there. Gesicht told him that there was a person constantly watching him whether he was driving around or at home. Hoffman told him that his line of work would definitely generate reactions from others, but he doubted that this stalker would follow him to Japan. Hoffman asked if Gesicht would be leaving tonight, and Gesicht confirmed. Hoffman wished him an enjoyable trip, saying they would discuss the stalker if it troubled him again after he returned. Then Hoffman bid him farewell and left. Meanwhile, Adolf was driving in his car, saying he needed to kill Gesicht today. He quickly changed direction to head to his brother's grave. There, he asked his brother to grant him some strength to kill Gesicht, but he was shocked to find his car exploded and completely destroyed. Adolf wondered what was happening. At the airport, an announcement was made for travelers to head to gate 68. Gesicht and Helena went to the gate, where Helena asked him if he was feeling better. Gesicht replied that it was their first vacation in a long time, so they should relax. Suddenly, Gesicht received a call about an explosion. At the same time, it was reported on television that at 2 a.m. Central European Time, the news confirmed the death of the famous robot Adam. At that moment, Gesicht was shocked and began to stumble around, saying, "Is the killer still alive?" Then the dream happened at the same time Adam died. Gesicht then requested to open the dream from his trash can. At that moment, Gesicht saw in the dream Adam telling him that he was both he and Pluto, the robot itself. Adam asked if he was the one who killed him. Then Gesicht chased some confused memories. Helena quickly ran toward him, and later, Gesicht also saw in his dream Dr. Tenma trying to urge a child named Toby to walk toward him, repeating that Toby walked. Suddenly, Toby disassembled and turned into a robot. Gesicht saw in his dream his wife Helena also telling him that Toby walked. Gesicht suddenly woke up in Professor Hoffman's lab after the professor ordered the erasure of Gesicht's memory and his reprogramming. When Gesicht woke up, Hoffman asked if he was okay. Gesicht removed the devices, affirming that he was fine. Meanwhile, someone told Professor Hoffman that Gesicht's functions were back to working perfectly. However, Hoffman tried to convince Gesicht to rest a bit since he collapsed at the airport, but Gesicht insisted on getting up and going because he received an emergency call from work. Gesicht immediately put on his jacket, and Helena told him she was happy he was okay, but he apologized for canceling their vacation. Helena said it was okay. After Gesicht left, Hoffman told Helena that he understood her concern for Gesicht because he returned to work right after collapsing, but she assured him that Gesicht going back to work was better than them going on vacation to Japan where Adam died. Meanwhile, Adolf was in the interrogation room, and the investigators were questioning him about the explosion of his car, confirming that his car exploded intentionally. They suggested that someone might hold a grudge against him and that the explosion could be an assassination attempt, but Adolf asked the investigators to stop asking him those questions, insisting he had no idea about that. On the other side, two investigators were following the investigation behind glass, with one saying to the other that the forensic report had confirmed the presence of Mrs. 390 parts among the wreckage of Adolf's car. The other replied in shock, saying it was an integrated rocket launcher designed as an inhuman weapon, and wondered about Adolf's profession and whether he was an illegal arms dealer. The first replied that Adolf was involved in import and export, but his brother's identity was suspicious. During the investigation, the investigator asked Adolf a question about his brother, and before the investigator completed his question, Adolf erupted in anger and asked if the investigator didn't know the Bloomberg civil rights law, which states that the same crimes committed by suspects cannot be directed at their relatives in any interrogation. He informed him that his question was illegal. Then the investigator from the monitoring room ordered him to keep Adolf under surveillance, since this case involved a lethal weapon of the MZ-390 type, and instructed him to keep it between them so that prosecutors and those involved wouldn't know anything about this case. The interrogation ended, and Adolf returned to his office. He received a message from his wife at 8:32 asking him to call her, confirming she knew he was busy, which was why he hadn't returned home the night before. Then he received a recorded message at 12:13 p.m. from an anonymous source informing him that an anti-robot organization was targeting him and that the leader had ordered to dispose of him, assuring him that he was in danger. At that moment, Adolf connected the explosion incident with the leader's desire to eliminate him. Then the leader appeared and told Adolf that he had heard he was being targeted, informing him that it wasn't safe for him outside, so he needed to stay in his office all the time. Then Adolf ran around the office like a madman, saying maybe they planted a bomb in the office too. He then left the office completely, continuing to run in panic until Gesicht caught him and informed him he was from Europol and had been hired to protect him. Later, Hans, Adolf's son, was talking to Gesicht and asking him what happened to the villainous storyman and if he was arrested. Their conversation was interrupted by Adolf's entrance, and Hans then rushed toward him, saying that investigator Gesicht was indeed a super robot and also kind, and he had become one of his biggest fans. Gesicht greeted Adolf good morning, but Adolf told him they were leaving. In the car, Adolf asked Gesicht to stop feeding his son superhero robot stories. Gesicht assured him he hadn't intended to. Adolf then asked with surprise how a world-class robot like him was assigned to protect him. Gesicht replied that he was just following orders. Adolf asked if that was even at the expense of his vacation. Gesicht questioned how he knew about his vacation. Adolf replied nervously that he heard about it from his boss. Gesicht then asked Adolf if he hated robots, and Adolf apologized for having to submit to a robot's protection. When they arrived at the company, Gesicht began to examine Adolf's office for explosives. Then Gesicht declared the place completely safe, as he checked everything, and informed Adolf that he would wait in the neighboring room and just needed to let him know if he felt anything unusual. However, Adolf didn't stop blaming himself, saying he wished he had enough tools to destroy Gesicht. Adolf then confronted Gesicht, saying he knew the police assigned him to investigate him, not to protect him. Gesicht tried to speak, but Adolf interrupted, insisting the police thought his car was blown up because he did something suspicious. Adolf asked Gesicht to start investigating him as much as he wanted, but on the condition that he leaves after his investigations are done. Gesicht sat at Adolf's computer and began to inspect it, learning that Adolf dealt with importing and exporting computer parts and systems. Gesicht then noticed that Adolf had been to Persia during the Central Asian War. Adolf explained he went because the reconstruction after the war provided job opportunities, and many companies took similar steps. Most companies can't succeed by taking on high-stakes secret projects like this one. Adolf proudly stated that his company enjoyed extra trust due to its solid track record. He turned on the TV, and at that moment, news broke about the discovery of the body of the famous robotics expert Ronald Newton Howard early this morning in the outskirts of Australia. Dr. Howard was renowned for his discovery of photon energy, and the killing weapon was placed on the body in the form of horns. Adolf then mockingly asked Gesicht if Dr. Howard was the creator of the robot Epsilon. Gesicht questioned whether he should leave to console his friend Epsilon, since the world Howard created was now dead. Gesicht informed him that he was on a mission right now. Adolf then asked if he was the same investigator who took on previous cases of the same kind, telling him that the killer is the same as in those earlier crimes. Gesicht replied that there were many recent copycat crimes, with no solid evidence that the same killer was behind all of them. Adolf said he would show him something interesting on the computer, and then asked if he was familiar with Karatiba prison. Gesicht replied that it was a prison in Persia managed by the United Thracian States. Adolf informed him that this prison had contracted his company to install all its systems, but the company team noticed someone tried to erase the solitary confinement records. When they tried to maintain the surveillance systems, they discovered a serious malfunction, and they had to replace the hard drives. Then, an important recording of an inmate was discovered inside the prison. Adolf played the recording for Gesicht, but it initially sounded unclear. Gesicht pushed Adolf away from the computer and sat down to try to clarify the fuzzy recording, while Adolf continued to say that the inmate kept repeating the names of the members of the Bora Investigative Committee, as if he was casting a curse of death. Gesicht then asked Adolf if he knew what kind of prison Karatiba was, to which Adolf replied it was for holding war criminals. Gesicht corrected him, saying it was for the most dangerous war criminals. Suddenly, Gesicht's eyes widened as he succeeded in clarifying the video image. He then stood up quickly, grabbed Adolf by the collar, and demanded to know why he was keeping such important information to himself, explaining that the person in front of them was not an ordinary inmate, but Darius XIV, the supreme leader of the former Persian Empire. At that moment, Gesicht heard Darius repeating the name Professor Hoffman. Gesicht exclaimed that Hoffman was in danger. Meanwhile, Epsilon had reached Professor Hoffman's lab and took him without any preamble, flying him into the air. As they flew, Hoffman was shocked to see his lab had been blown up. Epsilon told him he was being targeted and that they needed to get him out of there. Hoffman questioned if he wasn't supposed to be a peaceful robot. Epsilon replied that his creator had been killed, and he was about to lose control. At the same time, Gesicht was trying to contact Hoffman but couldn't reach him. Adolf suggested that Gesicht go to him himself. Gesicht expressed that he was more worried about the data he had, explaining that Darius might be involved in this case and could be be related to an assassination attempt on him as well. Suddenly, a thermal bomb was thrown at Adolf's desk, but Gesicht noticed it and caught it in his hands before it exploded, instructing Adolf to get down on the ground. After Gesicht disabled the bomb, Adolf, trembling, said he had seen one like it during the Asian War, where such bombs turn people into ashes instantly. Gesicht asked him who exactly that was. Adolf ran to Gesicht, telling him he would reveal everything but demanded protection for himself and his family. Adolf then confessed that he was a member of an anti-robot organization, but the leader wanted to get rid of him because they believed he was a traitor. Adolf then knelt down, stating that his organization was responsible for the assassination of the Berlin robot judge, who had been killed some time ago. Gesicht calmed him down, telling him he would make the necessary arrangements to include him and his family in the witness protection program. Meanwhile, the leader of the organization was informed that Gesicht was protecting Adolf. The leader scornfully remarked that it was ridiculous. His follower told him that it was only a matter of time before Adolf revealed everything about the organization. The leader then handed his follower the same weapon Adolf had and ordered him to use it to kill him, saying, "Death to machines and traitors." Meanwhile, Gesicht was driving Adolf to a safe house. Adolf asked about his wife and son, and Gesicht reassured him that they were safe and would join him soon. On the other side, Hercules was somewhere giving water to Professor Hoffman, while Epsilon explained that he had to bring the professor here to keep him safe. Hercules replied that he would leave the professor with him to avoid any fighting, then followed up saying it was no problem because he needed bait to lure the enemy out into the open. However, he could not rely on someone who kept running away even after his creator's death. Epsilon then asked Hoffman about the secret conference he held with 2 other scientists in Kimberly 7 years ago, where he met Professor Howard. Hoffman mentioned that he had longed to meet Professor Howard, the inventor of photon energy, and there was a third scientist named Tenma, who invented the electronic brain. Epsilon asked him the purpose of the conference. Hoffman replied that the goal was for the 3 of them to share their research together, to create a more advanced robot that would end wars and save the planet. Hoffman added that he and Dr. Howard presented their research, while Dr. Tenma never revealed his findings to them. He simply told them that the optimal electronic brain would be able to experience suffering, hatred, and mistakes. Hercules asked Hoffman if Dr. Tenma took their research and ran away. Hoffman responded that Tenma grasped their research in a moment. Even though it wasn't simple research, Tenma was a genius with an ideal brain. Hoffman then recalled Tenma's last words during the conference when he warned Hoffman and Howard against trying to bridge the gap between robots and humans, insisting that this would create something monstrous. Epsilon then asked where Dr. Tenma, the creator of Atom, was now. Meanwhile, Okonomizu requested to communicate with Dr. Tenma. He suddenly remembered when he first met Tenma, apologizing to him that he would become his successor in the Ministry of Science, expressing sorrow at seeing the creator of the optimal electronic brain leaving the ministry. Tenma told him that electronic brains cannot be manufactured because they grow from feelings, but under Article 13 of the Robot Rights Protection Act, robots are equipped with a control device to suppress their emotions, hindering the growth of their electronic brains. Okonomizu remarked that he nevertheless succeeded in creating a masterpiece like Atom. Tenma responded that Atom was a failed invention. At that moment, Okonomizu was informed that contacting Tenma was not possible because his line was lost. Meanwhile, Hoffman was telling Hercules and Epsilon that Tenma had vanished from the scene and completely disappeared. When they held the Kimberly conference, Tenma's sudden appearance surprised everyone, but he had been missing ever since. Epsilon asked if Tenma only appeared at the conference to warn him against trying to make robots closer to humans, while Hercules inquired if he thought Tenma created an ideal robot. Hoffman replied, maybe. On the other hand, investigator Lehman contacted Gesicht and informed him that he received a signal from Hercules, confirming that Hoffman was safe. He asked how the analysis of the video data they took from Adolf was progressing. Adolf asked Gesicht if he could also hear what was being said. Lehman confirmed that the footage indeed belonged to Darius, and the words being repeated were from the members of the Bora Investigative Committee, but they were unsure whether it was an actual order for murder. Lehman continued that Persia had fallen victim to war after the Bora Committee withdrew, which might have made Darius harbor a grudge against the committee. Gesicht recalled that the committee had not found any weapons of mass destruction. Lehman stated that there were classified reports indicating the existence of a chip for creating a highly advanced electronic brain, acquired during the Bora Committee's investigation in Persia, and that chip was named Tenma. Lehman then addressed Adolf, saying the investigation into the anti-robot organization was still ongoing, but that other parties might also be targeting him due to the information he possessed. Adolf asked about his family, and Lehman informed him that they were safe and in his custody. Then, Gesicht stopped for a break on the way, prompting Adolf to rush to the restroom. When Gesicht checked the bathroom, he discovered a multitask cleaning robot inside. However, later the robot knocked on Adolf's door and ordered him to kill Gesicht if he wanted to save his family. Adolf snapped at the robot and destroyed it. Just then, Gesicht ran in and ordered Adolf to stop destroying the robot, raising him angrily. Adolf asked if he had killed his brother with the same expression. Meanwhile, Ochanomizu remembered his conversation with Tenma about electronic brains, where Tenma told him that a brain capable of hatred and killing would give birth to the greatest robot on the planet. Gesicht drove his car at full speed, haunted by memories of Adolf's brother, while Adolf kept reminding him he was just a killing machine. Eventually, Gesicht arrived at the secret hideout. As Adolf got out of the car, he mocked the hideout, calling it just a wooden cabin. Gesicht informed him that the cabin was equipped with the latest security systems. He then got back into his car, saying he would return in an hour and ordered Adolf to go inside and not leave, assuring him that his wife and son would join him soon. Adolf reminded Gesicht that he he was supposed to protect him, but Gesicht ignored him and activated the flight system in his car, taking off into the sky. Adolf recalled what the cleaning robot had told him, urging him to kill Gesicht and claiming he would find a weapon under the hazel tree, about 200 steps north of the hideout. Soon after, Adolf's family arrived, with his son running to hug him and asking about Gesicht, while his wife Elsa questioned what was happening. Adolf apologized for worrying her, and she pressed him again about his actions. Meanwhile, Gesicht paid another visit to Brau, who asked him how he was feeling. Hans was having fun in the cabin, telling his father that the basement felt like a nuclear bomb shelter and even had a gym. Elsa continued to question Adolf until he finally told her the whole truth. She expressed her sorrow, saying that Gesicht might have actually killed a man, but they were ultimately talking about his brother. She lamented that his brother deserved death for committing countless crimes that gave her chills just thinking about it. Adolf countered that even so, his brother didn't deserve to be killed by a machine. Elsa insisted that Gesicht was just following orders because it was his duty, affirming that Gesicht did not kill his brother out of hatred. Back with Gesicht, Brau told him he had sensed from the very first moment that he killed Adolf's brother out of hatred. He confirmed that he realized it upon seeing him for the first time, knowing immediately he resembled him. Brau added that this memory would never fade, despite attempts to erase it, as the scar would always remain. Gesicht recalled a blurred memory of Adolf's brother begging him for mercy, but at that moment, Gesicht didn't listen to his pleas. Instead, he drew his deadly weapon and aimed it at Adolf's brother. In the present, Brau asked Gesicht to satisfy his urge so he could clearly remember the true hatred. Meanwhile, an announcement was made about the appearance of the battle god Helklis, a champion. The scene shifted to show several machines battling each other with deadly weapons and exchanging gunfire during the fight. It was said that Helkis would face a strong opponent this time, as the strongest would prevail until beaten by an even stronger foe. On the other side, a police armored vehicle arrived to take Professor Hoffman. As Hoffman boarded the vehicle, he turned to Helklis and Epsilon, stating that Gesicht was currently investigating the case and asked them not to act rashly and to help Gesicht find a solution. Helklis reassured him that they would do just that. After the armored vehicle left with Hoffman, Epsilon sensed an unusual electromagnetic energy and informed Helklis, asking if he needed his assistance. Helklis declined, saying he wasn't authorized to help. Epsilon insisted he wasn't prepared for a fight, but Helklis told him he was fully prepared because he was built as a battle machine. Helklis then advised Epsilon to leave quickly, saying a machine without combat functions would only hinder him. Epsilon responded that Helklis was belittling him again, just like when he refused to fight in the war. Helklis conceded that perhaps Epsilon was right to refuse combat. Although he had been prepared for battle, that war wasn't true fighting. Helklis recalled an ally from the aerial battalion who had fought alongside him in the war and helped ensure the success of many missions. However, he later noticed that this ally kept washing his hands over and over. When Helklis asked what he was doing, the ally replied that he couldn't get rid of something. Returning to reality, Helklis told Epsilon that they were fighting a ghost. The enemy was a phantom, and he ordered him to leave immediately. Epsilon questioned why Adam was killed despite not committing any wrongdoing. Helklis fell silent as Epsilon continued asking what he knew, saying he had some insights about the war. Suddenly, a storm broke out, prompting Epsilon to tell Helklis he would wait for him at an altitude of 3,000 kilometers. Helklis turned back, stating he could gather combat data from that height, assuring him that he fought better with an audience, even if it was just one person, as he was Helklis, the battle. Later, Helklis grabbed a Brando memory chip and told him they had fought many battles that would go down in history, and the victor had never been determined. He wished they had managed to settle things back then. Helklis then donned his battle suit, declaring he would settle accounts with that thing. He then launched himself toward the storm that was erupting from the abyss of the sea, entering the whirlwind of the tornado. Helklis grabbed onto something within it while Epsilon watched the battle from above, noticing a circular gap spinning rapidly inside the cyclone. On the other side, the 99th military trial was taking place, where Judge Darius, the 14th, ordered an oath be taken immediately. Darius told him that did not trust an oath. The judge repeated his order to Darius to swear an oath. Darius retorted that humans lie, which is why he does not believe them. He continued, saying humanity needed to be replaced with a new species, one of machines. The judge ruled to raise the session and have Darius removed from the courtroom. At that point, those present arose, accusing Darius of murder, claiming he was responsible for the massacre. Darius stated that this massacre was part of evolution, provoking the crowd further, demanding he be punished with death. Among them, one person shouted that he was with the Human Rights Organization and offered to help Darius. Darius requested coloring pencils. Meanwhile, Epsilon awaited the outcome of Helklis' battle against the enemy. Suddenly, parts of a machine flew high into the air, leading Epsilon to wonder if those parts belonged to Helklis. He became distracted as those pieces mixed with parts of the enemy, questioning whether Helklis had defeated the adversary and the adversary had also destroyed him. Epsilon then looked to the shore and saw the body Helklis used in his everyday life falling into the water, leading him to ponder what was happening, certain that the machine parts were spreading throughout the sea. However, he could not detect anything due to the flow of electromagnetic waves. Meanwhile, Helklis continued fighting, gripping the enemy's horns, determined to break them. Epsilon thought that if he helped Hercules now, they could get rid of the enemy, but just as he was about to move, he started losing control over his body and couldn't even move. Confused memories began to attack him, while at the same time the enemy overpowered Hercules, tying him up with his tail and lifting him high. In the prison, the two policemen were telling Darius that he had exceeded the time limit to turn off the electricity, but Darius ignored them and kept drawing and coloring on the wall. When the policemen opened the cell, they found Darius saying that the only survivor would be Pluto, while Epsilon witnessed Hercules' death and immediately fled, saying he had to inform Gesicht about Hercules' death because he was the only one authorized to arrest the enemy. However, when he tried to contact Gesicht, he couldn't reach him, as Gesicht was driving his car, remembering Adolf's accusations that he had killed his brother. Later, the investigator asked Gesicht to pay attention to the new case, as robots had been brought in to identify their son's body. One robot told his wife that humans cry in such situations, and then shared that they had applied to adopt a child as soon as the child robot adoption program was launched, expressing joy at adopting that little robot. After that, Gesicht introduced himself to the investigators, saying he was involved in the investigation of that case. One investigator cautioned that involving a robot in this case might be a bad idea, explaining that child robots were being kidnapped and torn apart, and the perpetrator could be someone opposed to robots. Gesicht replied that he was following orders and would investigate all possibilities behind the kidnapping of child robots. The investigator continued, stating that the perpetrator had kidnapped child robots every time after destroying the surveillance system, bringing the total number of kidnappings to 23. At that moment, one investigator was informed that they had installed Akame cameras at 304 locations, but he was also told that all the robot haters and their opponents had been spotted in other areas at the time of the incident, leading another investigator to conclude that all the suspects had alibis. Later, news broke on social media that investigator Gesicht had joined the case. Gesicht reprimanded his boss, Baker, questioning why he had informed the media. Baker explained that this was a misleading tactic to demonstrate Gesicht's commitment to solving the case, which would prevent him from being implicated in the next crime. Later, investigator Henry explained to Gesicht that they had narrowed down the list of robot haters to 7 people who were not captured by surveillance cameras, all of whom were in the European Union at the time of the crime, and were now all under surveillance. Gesicht asked him if he could compare the failure rates of the Akame 3 systems before and after the incidents. Henry replied that the manufacturing company had that data, affirming that the system itself was top of the line, but was still prone to failure. The failure rate over the past 3 years was 3.26%, and after the incidents, it was 3.25%, even though the crimes occurred after the suspect destroyed the system. At the same time, a kidnapping victim was reported in the W25 district, a child robot. Gesicht then received an order from Baker to head straight to the crime scene. He called Helena to apologize for having an emergency, but she told him something that made him return to investigator Henry immediately, asking him to find reasons for the Akame 3 failures because he couldn't access the case data. Henry noticed Gesicht didn't seem like himself, but Gesicht insisted he only wanted him to follow his instructions. Soon, Henry presented all the reasons for the Akame 3 system failures over the past 3 months, noting 3 cases of power outages from lightning and 38 issues with control chips. Gesicht asked Henry to compare that data with the last 3 years' data, and Henry informed him that the rates were almost consistent. Gesicht realized the perpetrator hadn't destroyed the systems. Henry cautioned that there had been one incident yesterday that indicated a human had destroyed the system, but no kidnappings had occurred yesterday. Gesicht then asked Henry to show him the list of maintenance contractors around the kidnapping operations, and once Gesicht saw the list, he stated that the kidnappings began with the system repair, not with its failure. Henry mentioned that only one person was responsible for repairing the system, and then showed Gesicht a picture of this person, prompting Gesicht to rush outside without responding to Henry calling after him. Meanwhile, Adolf was searching around a tree for the weapon the cleaning robot had told him about when he was confronted by Meyer, a member of Europol, who asked what he was doing. Adolf inquired if he was looking for the weapon to return to the hideout. Meyer informed him that when he stopped to take a break near the forest on his way to the hideout, the camera footage had recorded a suspicious man following him. Upon investigating this suspicious individual, it turned out to be a member of the anti-robot organization. Meyer continued by saying that the organization was aware of his movements and he needed to be moved to another location. Suddenly, Gesicht returned and reprimanded Meyer for leaving his spot without permission, warning him he would file a report about it. However, Gesicht noted that the priority now was to protect Mr. Planet. Adolf informed him that he was aware of the situation and would move Adolf immediately. Adolf asked Gesicht if he had abandoned his mission, insisting that what he had done to his brother was not part of his duty. Gesicht responded that his current mission was to protect him. Later, Gesicht drove Adolf and his family in his car. Hans asked from which direction the bad guys would come, and Gesicht reassured him that the investigator's car was following behind them, so there was no need to worry. Hans asked if his arm would turn into a gun if the bad guys showed up, mentioning that they had been told in school that robots couldn't shoot people. Adolf noted that if it came to that, Gesicht would surely pull the trigger. Suddenly, Gesicht noticed that the investigator's car had disappeared and he lost contact with him. Elsa asked if they were being pursued. Gesicht ordered everyone to buckle up, saying he would speed up. He began driving as fast as he could, claiming the police car had vanished in an instant, which indicated that the weapon used could be. Adolf completed his thought, saying it might be an embedded cluster weapon, the same model he had. Adolf pleaded with Gesicht to help him or at least help his son and wife. He shared with Gesicht what the robot had told him during the break, continuing that the organization had originally plotted to kill them both, to keep their secrets hidden. Adolf admitted he hated Gesicht for killing his brother, and told him that he certainly understood the feeling of hatred, otherwise he wouldn't have killed his brother in that way. But he insisted his family shouldn't be brought into this situation because because that was between them. Gesicht ordered him to grab the lever on his right. Suddenly, the pursuer fired a projectile at Gesicht's car, causing Gesicht to fly upward while holding Elsa and Hans in his arms, while Adolf safely fell to the ground thanks to the lever. The pursuer emerged from the armored vehicle and aimed the projectile at Adolf, insisting a regular pistol would be enough to kill him, but their leader had instructed him to make it appear that he died in an explosion from the cluster cannon. At that moment, Gesicht appeared and aimed his weapon at the pursuer. The pursuer asked if it wasn't forbidden to shoot from his right hand and reminded him that he wasn't allowed to kill a human. Gesicht ordered Adolf to slowly approach him and stand behind him. The pursuer warned that his gun could turn them into bits, even if there was a zirconium robot present. The moment the pursuer fired his projectile, Gesicht also fired from his gun, creating what resembled an explosion, leaving the pursuer stunned by the situation. Gesicht informed him that his left arm was releasing a gas that could put him to sleep and demanded he surrender calmly, or he would lose consciousness due to the gas. Later, Gesicht was taken for repair, during which Adolf informed him that his brother was the worst of criminals and that he had attempted to kill him for revenge, yet he used his own body as a shield to protect him. Gesicht replied that this was his duty, then asked Adolf whether the feeling of hatred among humans fades away or continues no matter how hard they try to erase it. Adolf remained silent, prompting Gesicht to share that what he feared most after learning about hate was turning into it himself. On another side, a girl was watching Oran from the school building's window, telling two others that Oran used to be very cheerful, but ever since that incident, she always seeks to be alone, proving her development as a mechanism. Just then, the principal interrupted, stating that robots feel sadness and shed tears just like humans. A robot named Sakamoto chimed in, agreeing that even an old-fashioned robot like him could feel sadness. The principal wondered what they could do to bring Oran out of her sadness, then mentioned that she wasn't alone in mourning Adam. Suddenly, Oran stood up, saying she felt a deeper sadness coming from somewhere. She ran off to a spot in the garden and found a small kitten, picking it up and wondering if it was the one feeling sad and where its mother was. But the kitten wasn't the source of her sorrow, so Oran continued her search until she came across a child who was facing away from her. She asked if he felt sad, but he told her to leave him alone. Oran insisted there was no point in jumping from there. When the child turned to face her, his entire face was bruised, and he asked what he should do as he was bullied every day and threatened for money. The boy then knelt before her, saying that death would be better for him. Oran replied that she didn't understand the desire for death because she was a robot. The child questioned how a robot could understand that, asking her to just leave him alone. Oran told him she was very sad because her brother was killed, but wouldn't it be reasonable for her to want death too if she were human like him? She then looked at the kitten she was holding and noted that it was sad too, but all it thought about right now was milk to curb its hunger. The child asked her if they would abandon that kitten, so Oran approached him and placed the kitten in his hands. He informed her that the kitten was shivering from hunger and they should feed it, but Oran ran off, asking the child to get the kitten some milk, as she felt that someone else was even more sad just a few steps away. As Oran headed toward the sad individual, she stumbled upon a wallet. She picked it up and continued on her way until she came across an elderly man in the middle of the road. She asked if he was looking for his wallet. He took it from her, stating he had placed his pension card inside it to buy a gift for his grandson. He thanked her and went on his way, and Oran continued searching for the sad person until she arrived at a cemetery. There, she saw a bouquet of flowers placed on a grave. Oran remarked that the person whose sadness she felt was just there, seemingly mourning the same person's death twice. Then she read the gravestone's name, Tobio Tenma. Meanwhile, at the Ministry of Science, the secretary informed Minister Okonomizu that the Prime Minister had called several times. Okonomizu shouted at her to tell everyone he did not want to discuss holding a formal funeral for Adam, insisting that he had not given up yet. He asked her if she hadn't received a response from the former minister yet, and at that moment, he heard Okonomizu from security blocking someone from entering, saying that they needed to make an appointment first. Otherwise, security wouldn't be able to verify their identity. The man then told them that there wouldn't be any issue with the security system because he was the former head of the Ministry of Science. At that point, Okonomizu ran toward the man, calling him Dr. Tenma, and telling him that he had been waiting for him since he was the only one capable of saving Atum in this condition, considering he was the one who created him. Dr. Tenma responded firmly that Adam could not be saved because Adam was dead. He had only come to say goodbye. Tenma then stood in front of Adam's body, connected to machines in a room, and he remembered Toby, who resembled Adam, sharing a meal with him. Toby had told him he studied in the morning and cleaned his room in the afternoon, but he got so engrossed in reading about the beautiful butterfly Zephyros found in an encyclopedia that he forgot to finish cleaning, wishing to see a live one. Tenma asked him how he found the food he was eating, and Toby said it was delicious. Outside Adam's room, a researcher ran toward Okonomizu, informing him that Dr. Tenma was trying to revive Adam. Okonomizu followed the researcher to the data monitoring room, where the researcher told him that what he saw was unbelievable. There, Okonomizu saw Dr. 12, Tenma working tirelessly to revive Adam and update his data. The other researcher wondered if they were witnessing a real genius at work. Okonomizu replied that he knew Tenma would do this, even though he said he came to say goodbye to Adam. Later, Okonomizu brought Tenma a cup of tea, telling him he needed to rest after working for 18 hours straight. Tenma then acknowledged Okonomizu's remarkable repairs on Adam, noting there were no anomalies in his artificial spine or either hemisphere of his brain. Tenma confirmed that he had checked the modifications of the receptors and the gaps in the neural connections, all of which were correct. Okonomizu then asked why Atum wouldn't wake up, following it up by stating that they faced a case involving the destruction of the most advanced automaton in the world, alongside the murder of former members of the Bora investigation committee. Suddenly, Ochanomizu stood up and inquired about Dr. Guji, mentioning that he was the doctor who built the army of automatons for the Persian kingdom. Tenma replied that he didn't know him, explaining that the artificial intelligence he developed should not be used to build an army because the automaton with his AI was nobler and more complete than to be used for war. Tenma admitted that he had created an ideal automaton at someone's request, despite having warned that it would be costly. He continued by saying that the most advanced AI in the world, including Adam, had extremely complex programming but was limited, which is why he had resorted to analyzing and programming 9.9 billion personalities, the same number as the world's population, and tested all of this on the ideal automaton. Tenma shocked Ochanomizu by revealing that this automaton ultimately refused to wake up, and though the matter was extremely complicated, he managed to revive it by directing unbalanced emotions towards it, like love, anger, and hatred. Ochanomizu then asked where that automaton was, to which Tenma replied that its owner must have hidden it and it was still asleep. Ochanomizu then questioned whether Atom shared the same situation or felt something unimaginable, mimicking a response to it. He further asked if Adam wouldn't wake up for the same reason that prevented Tenma's ideal automaton from waking. Ochanomizu commented that if they gave Adam unbalanced emotions, a new and different Adam might emerge. Tenma warned that Adam could return as a monster. This reminded Tenma of a moment when he sat with Toby, recounting that the real Toby had died in a car accident and that Toby never liked cleaning his room. Toby then told him he wouldn't clean his room much starting tomorrow. Tenma noted that his son Toby always hated studying. Toby said he wouldn't study then. Tenma continued, saying that Toby had placed the encyclopedia he bought for him on the last shelf in the library and hadn't looked at it. Then he asked Toby if he loved him, and Toby replied that he did. Tenma felt he had been too hard on his son and always scolded him. For this reason, he was sure Toby hated him. Elsewhere, Geigesh returned to work, and Hoffman attempted to contact him, warning him against returning to work while still in the midst of repairs, as cluster bomb fragments remained inside him. However, Geigesh was flying his vehicle in an area resembling a desert at that time. Epsilon then reached out to him, stating he urgently needed his help. Meanwhile, Geigesh arrived at Darius's prison, and after confirming his identity, they admitted him into the prison, where Colonel Armstrong from the Thracian army greeted him. Geigesh introduced himself, while the colonel informed him that his force had not joined the International Criminal Law Treaty, and that his request had been granted only under a special order from the president. The colonel then told Geigesh that time was limited, and that he needed to wrap things up quickly. He remarked that their automatons were outdated, even though the prison facility was very modern, but they were behind in automaton manufacturing. However, if they got advanced automatons like Geigesh, the Persian kingdom could be rebuilt swiftly. Later, communication was established with prisoner Darius, but Geigesh initially rejected the electronic communication method and preferred a face-to-face meeting with the prisoner. Despite this, he proceeded with the interrogation, asking Darius about the prison conditions, to which Darius replied that they were not bad. Geigesh then objected to the communication method, insisting that he would see the prisoner in person. The colonel warned him that this would be considered a breach of international laws, but Geigesh stated he didn't care about their relationship with Europol because the whole world was currently in danger. Indeed, Geigesh was admitted to meet Darius, who told him that he looked just like humans. Geigesh then asked him if he was the mastermind behind the series of crimes destroying advanced automatons and if he had ordered the assassination of the Bora Investigation Committee members. Darius responded that the Bora Committee members were liars who turned his country into a barren desert, robbing their civilization due to their machines and cursed artificial intelligence. Geigesh then asked if this was why he created a monster out of revenge. Darius replied that he did not create it, it was born. He claimed that this automaton was the strongest and purest automaton, loved by God. Geigesh, puzzled, repeated, "Born?" Darius said it was an automaton reborn in a stronger and more resilient body. He then pointed to a flower mural on the wall, saying, "This is Pluto." Geigesh attacked him, asking who Pluto was, and Darius confidently said he was sure Geigesh knew this. Darius then bit his tongue in an attempt to commit suicide, prompting Geigesh to call for help immediately. Afterward, Geigesh exited the prison and reported what had happened to his superior. Suddenly, Epsilon fell in front of him, handing him something belonging to Heracles. He informed Geigesh that during Hercules' killing, massive electromagnetic waves were released, and his analysis showed that these waves indicated hatred, but he also caught a glimpse of someone in a picture. When Epsilon showed the picture to Geigesh, he exclaimed that it was unbelievable that this was Pluto. Later, Gesicht strolled through the market, where vendors displayed their goods. Meanwhile, his superior was in contact with him, ordering him to return immediately, while they would handle Darius's suicide attempt, as the provinces of Thrace were strict. Gesicht sighed, tired of his superior's methods, while Becker expressed concern for his physical condition. Professor Hoffman feared that his Zerunium power had weakened due to the cannon explosion. Gesicht thanked his superior for his concern and assured him he was close to solving the case. His superior asked if he had any idea about who was behind all this. Gesicht replied that he had what they called a hunch. The president questioned how a machine could have a gut feeling. As Gesicht continued on his way, he was surprised to see a robotic flower vendor stumble and fall. He helped the robot get back up, and the vendor thanked him, saying his balance had been off since being damaged in the war. Geigesh advised him to take care of himself. The robot then offered to sell him flowers, emphasizing that he accepted credit cards, but Geigesh said he didn't have time. Later, Geigesh met Abdullah at a cafe, where Abdullah introduced himself as the Minister of Science in the Persian Republic. After they shook hands, Geigesh ordered coffee, and Abdullah encouraged him to relax, mentioning he was a scientist. Abdullah then steered the conversation to his personal experiences, sharing that he had lost most of his body in the recent war. Geigesh apologized but was thanked by Abdullah for meeting him, expressing a desire to show how the country was rising from the rubble after the war, with markets reopening. Abdullah noticed the robotic flower vendor watching Gesicht from a distance and asked if the robot was his friend. Gesicht replied that he had just met him. Abdullah continued, noting that their country's economy was beginning to improve, yet their children remained marginalized in society. Abdullah then asked Gesicht the reason for his visit, and Gesicht directly inquired about his connection to Darius XIV. Abdullah confirmed they were on good terms, sharing that Darius often spoke of turning the desert into a land of green fields. Gesicht asked if he meant flower fields, and then inquired about Guji. Abdullah affirmed that he meant flower fields, but denied knowing Guji. Gesicht insisted it was impossible, as he had heard of a brilliant scientist named Guji who enabled the creation of an advanced robotic army during Darius's reign. Abdullah mentioned that Guji appeared in the Bora Investigative Committee's report, but there was no proof of his existence, suggesting the stories about Guji were mere rumors. Gesicht asked about the recovered artificial intelligence model by Tenma. Abdullah explained that Dr. Tenma and the genius scientist he referenced created an absolute artificial intelligence so advanced that the robot never woke up. Rumors circulated that the robot was still asleep in Darius's palace. Abdullah encouraged Gesicht to check on it himself, but excused himself due to time constraints. Before leaving, Gesicht showed him a picture of a man in a flower field, the same image he had taken from Epsilon. Abdullah claimed not to recognize him. Gesicht shook his hand, thanking him for his cooperation, and apologized for his earlier confusion about identifying him as either a robot or human. Abdullah dismissed it, and Gesicht mentioned he had been perplexed when meeting Adam. Abdullah replied that Adam was indeed a very advanced robot. Gesicht then revealed that his device had just identified Abdullah as human, especially after he showed him the photo of the man in the flower field. Gesicht lied, saying he had never seen him before since robots couldn't lie. Abdullah left the cafe abruptly without explanation, and Gesicht followed him out, finding the flower vendor still waiting, urging him to buy flowers. Gesicht remarked that the vendor's boss would be angry if he kept chasing customers like that. He continued walking until he stopped abruptly upon hearing a charm vendor promoting the Guji amulet of the Wise Sands. Gesicht repeated, "Guji amulet?" The charm seller explained that Guji was a legendary sage who turned back into sand after revealing the truth of life to the ancient Uzbek king. Gesicht reflected on the amulet, recalling Abdullah's mention of the robot that had not awakened. The flower vendor approached from behind, and Gesicht took a flower from him and asked for his name. The vendor replied, "Muhammad Ali," expressing his wish to become a scientist. Gesicht encouraged him that he could achieve his dream if he studied hard. The flower vendor asked if he thought he could become like Saad. Gesicht replied in surprise, "Saad?" The flower vendor explained he was the person whose photo he had shown earlier. Gesicht showed him the picture and asked if that was the person he meant. The vendor confirmed that this was Saad, who studied in Holland to turn the land into flower fields, calling him his hero. Gesicht told him he could definitely become like Saad, and urged him not to lose hope. Gesicht then began looking into Saad, tracking down the house he rented. The landlord informed him that Saad lived in a room on the 3rd floor, and explained that he had planted all the flowers lining the building's windows. Gesicht admired their beauty, and the landlord said Saad had studied botany and that all the plants he had planted continued to thrive even after many years. She recalled asking Saad one day if he knew of any plants that bloom year-round without wilting, to which he replied that flowers should wilt after producing seeds. Gesicht then asked for a picture of Saad, and the landlord assured him she had one, but it was on her old computer. She asked Gesicht to return later, promising to look for the computer in the storage room. She then asked him if Saad had done something wrong since someone from Europol was investigating him. Gesicht denied it, and the landlord remarked that Saad had been so kind that no one would have guessed he was a robot. Later, Gesicht continued investigating Saad at his school. His teacher told him that Saad had been an excellent and passionate student, driven by his love for his country above all else. He dedicated himself to filling the deserts of the Persian kingdom with flowers. The professor mentioned that Saad's research was highly advanced, and recalled how Saad once told him that Igor had become strong, and at another time, he said Janice was sick. Then he added that Ishtar had improved. The professor explained that these names were those of tulip flowers, as named by Saad, who had given each flower a name to help it grow better. He then apologized to Gesicht, assuring him he meant no offense, but despite Saad being one of the most advanced robots, he sometimes said unscientific and unrealistic things. The professor took Gesicht to his lab and showed him a tulip that Saad had planted, which continued to grow without wilting. Gesicht asked how many years it had been growing, and the professor said 3. He recounted that Saad had instructed him not to plant it in the ground until he returned, but intended to study it if Saad did not return. The professor looked at the tulip, noting that it seemed to be waiting for Saad as well. Later, Gesicht stopped in front of a flower shop, where a flower vendor asked the robot Anton to deliver a bouquet to Miss Van Dyke's shop. Gesicht remarked that Anton was a diligent worker. Then he shared that he had met a flower vendor in the Persian kingdom who wasn't happy with his job. The girl responded that it was Saad's country, and told Gesicht that Saad used to frequent her shop, helping her run it after school. He always told her he wanted to fill his country with flowers, but suddenly informed her one day that he would return to his country and join the army. The girl sadly recalled trying to stop Saad, since someone like him shouldn't become a soldier, no matter how long the war lasted. But Saad told her his father had died in the war, and that he might face the same fate. Gesicht then asked about the tulip that continued to grow, as he learned that Saad had named each flower. The girl explained that Saad conducted various experiments at a research site in Zandam to develop a flower that could withstand the desert. He wanted many of that flower, but once went to check on his flowers, only to find that only one was growing while all the surrounding flowers had withered. The girl believed that flower was named Pluto, Pluto. Later, Gesicht returned to the landlord, who told him she had found the computer. Gesicht started flipping through the tenant's photos until he found a picture of Sud. He mentioned to her that the picture was cut. The owner replied that Sud had told her he was photographed with his father. Gesicht thought for a moment and reasoned that since Sud was an android, he must resemble his creator. Then, he discovered that the second half of the picture belonged to Professor Abdullah, which left Gesicht astonished. Meanwhile, a doll sitting on a chair in a dim place remarked that Gesicht was getting close to the truth, confirming that his investigative skills were remarkable and his ability to accomplish tasks was impressive. Given that Gesicht possessed a zeronium weapon, he could be the strongest weapon of mass destruction ever found, which might lead to Pluto's downfall. However, there was a way to kill Gesicht. As events unfolded, Gesicht went to meet Brau, who expressed his jealousy about being trapped in this body and unable to move. Brau asked Gesicht if he knew who was responsible for all these events, to which Gesicht replied, Professor Abdullah. Meanwhile, Epsilon witnessed the funeral of the scientist Howard. Suddenly, he was taken aback by the sound of Abdullah speaking to him from behind, saying he couldn't believe he had met him. Epsilon turned around, and Abdullah introduced himself. Epsilon questioned if Abdullah had traveled all the way from Persia to attend the funeral. Abdullah lamented that he wished he had met Professor Howard when he was alive, stating that history would record Howard's achievements in developing photon energy. He went on to discuss how Howard helped end the dictatorship in Persia as a member of the Bora investigation committee, contributing to bringing peace back to Persia. Abdullah then turned to Epsilon and told him that Professor Howard had left a legacy and admitted being amazed at his level of perfection. Epsilon noted he heard about Howard losing most of his body in the war, to which Abdullah replied that this loss could not compare to losing a family. On the other side, Brau understood that Gesicht hadn't just visited him to inform him that Abdullah was responsible for the series of events. Gesicht asked Brau what would happen when the android had absolute artificial intelligence. Brau answered that the android would not awaken because simulating 9.9 billion personalities on Earth would be endless. Gesicht further questioned how to awaken the android. Brau suggested endowing it with extreme emotions like hatred, anger, and sadness. Meanwhile, Abdullah commented to Epsilon that his powers must have weakened with the death of his creator. Epsilon replied that he didn't need immense strength. Abdullah mentioned that he had heard about Epsilon's refusal to fight in the war, confirming that he was right because the war was unjust. It took everything from him, his wife and children. Abdullah's tears fell as the funeral concluded. He then asked Epsilon what was the most important thing in his life, but before Epsilon could answer, his adopted children appeared. Epsilon apologized to them, indicating that the funeral was over and it was time to go home. The children gathered around Epsilon, and Abdullah mentioned he'd heard that Epsilon had adopted war orphans, begging him to take care of those kids for his sake. Abdullah continued that he must attend the European Android Conference, as rebuilding Persia required more incredible androids like him. After Abdullah left, the children told Epsilon that Wasley was missing. They began searching for Wasley, who was hiding behind a tree. When they found him, Epsilon reassured him that they were no longer in the battlefield. However, Wasley kept repeating, Bora. On the other side, Brau told Gesicht that an android with absolute intelligence would eventually lie to everyone, including itself, once it regained consciousness. Gesicht inquired about Pluto, and Brau explained that Pluto must be at home undergoing repairs for the damage he sustained in his battle against Hercules. Gesicht remarked that Persia was Sud's homeland, to which Brau corrected him, saying it was Pluto's homeland, the tulip flower. At that moment, Gesicht sped off in his vehicle and called his boss, stating they needed to arrest Abdullah immediately. His boss asked what he planned to do, stressing that Abdullah was a very important person. Gesicht informed him that he would head to the agricultural research facility owned by Persia in the Netherlands, specifically in Zaandam on the outskirts of Amsterdam. Meanwhile, researchers praised Professor Hoffman's speech, affirming he deserved all the accolades he received. One thanked him for attending the European Android Conference despite all the challenges he faced, asking if the security measures arranged for him were satisfactory. Hoffman confirmed that he managed to attend the conference thanks to those measures. Then, 2 robotic guards arrived, informing Hoffman that the helicopter was ready and that they would secure the area first. One of them remarked that the entire field of mechanical engineering relied on Professor Hoffman. Before Dr. Hoffman boarded the helicopter, he asked his guard about the bathroom, to which the guard replied that he had checked it. Hoffman concluded that he would be fine alone, so he went to the bathroom where he encountered Abdullah, who praised his speech, saying he was moved by the insights regarding the potential contributions of zeronium to peace. Abdullah then introduced himself to Professor Hoffman, claiming he was from the Persian Republic. Meanwhile, Gesicht descended into the basement of the agricultural research facility, finding a regular generator and noticing weak electromagnetic waves, similar to those recorded by Epsilon during the Hercules battle. He continued walking through the place until he was suddenly confronted by Abdullah's follower blocking his path. The man suddenly opened his mouth and vomited cockroaches that filled the ground. At the conference venue, Abdullah shook hands with Hoffman, expressing his pleasure at meeting him as he was, after all, Gesicht's creator. Hoffman asked Abdullah if he needed any assistance regarding Persia. Abdullah replied that zeronium was an ideal metal and suggested they might consider lifting the restrictions on zeronium supply. He further stated that a criminal who destroys the most advanced androids could not overcome Gesicht, considering he was made of zirconium, even though he had recently heard that Gesicht was harmed by a cluster gun. Hoffman confirmed the information was accurate, but the damage inflicted on Gesicht was not severe. Abdullah remarked that Gesicht seemed to have no weaknesses. Hoffman told him that Gesicht was built with multiple layers of advanced control systems. Abdullah asked what would happen if Gesicht made a mistake, like accidentally killing someone. Meanwhile, Gesicht was launching a projectile at one of Abdullah's followers, only to be taken aback by multiple copies of that follower and wondered what was protecting them. Abdullah continued his conversation with Hoffman, asking about a robot from the past named Brow, who he said described his crimes as execution, just as humans do when committing murder. Hoffman inquired what exactly Abdullah was trying to say. Abdullah responded that the Persian kingdom was executed after he and the members of the investigative committee entered the land, leaving Hoffman silent. Abdullah then apologized, stating that peace was achieved in the Persian kingdom thanks to him, but insisted the robot should be executed if it killed a human. Hoffman assured him that Gesicht wouldn't make such a mistake. Abdullah argued that an advanced robot like Gesicht might even commit suicide. Hoffman replied that authorities could erase those memories from Gesicht's mind before he would think of that. Suddenly, Hoffman remembered asking his boss, Schilling, what he had done to Gesicht's memory. At that moment, Abdullah expressed envy towards robots for their ability to wipe their memories. Simultaneously, Gesicht was running in the basement and received a call from Europol informing him they'd located Abdullah in Dusseldorf for a robot conference. Gesicht ordered to arrest Abdullah immediately, and the caller let him know that Professor Hoffman was also at the same location for the conference. On the other side, Hoffman stepped into the elevator with his robotic guard, who asked him if everything was okay. Unexpectedly, the robot became furious without reason and declared that those who harmed the Persian kingdom should be executed. Meanwhile, Gesicht was making calls to secure Professor Hoffman's safety when he suddenly felt something moving beside him. Meanwhile, security was everywhere in the Dusseldorf building. Someone rushed in, asking Baker to check the elevator camera. Baker noticed a monster cornering Hoffman inside the elevator heading towards the helicopter pad on the top floor. As Baker ordered a pursuit of that elevator, he was informed that the rest of the elevators were out of order. Hoffman asked his guard if something else was controlling his artificial intelligence. He then heard Baker's voice coming through the elevator, asking him to stay calm, but the robot blasted the speaker. Hoffman asked if he had killed the other scientists, and the robot told him that he had to be executed. At the same time, Baker called him, informing him that Hoffman had been kidnapped. Gesicht responded that he would pursue him as quickly as possible but was currently engaged in a battle. Back in the elevator, Hoffman told the robot that he felt responsible for what happened to the Persian kingdom, but killing him wouldn't change anything. The other guard stopped the elevator and instructed the robot to open the door. The robot exited the elevator, pushed the other guard against the wall, and smashed him. Hoffman asked who he was exactly, and the robot replied, Bora. At that moment, police forces arrived at the helicopter pad and noticed cockroaches crawling on the ground, but they paid them no mind. Then, they saw the robot dragging Hoffman along the ground. Baker ordered them to open fire on the robot. Simultaneously, Gesicht continued battling against Pluto, firing his ammunition, until Pluto caught him by the tail. Gesicht informed Pluto that his body was made of zirconium, making him immune to thermal or magnetic rays. Gesicht managed to free himself from Pluto's grip as Pluto quickly retreated, disappearing and leaving a massive pile of ash behind. Gesicht wondered if Pluto had buried himself alive. He reported to his superior Baker that he had caught his target and asked about Professor Hoffman's safety. Baker confirmed that Hoffman was fine and ordered Gesicht to destroy the target. But as Gesicht aimed his gun at the target, he was surprised to find his surroundings completely transformed, standing in the middle of a desert, surrounded by people crying. Gesicht said these illusions wouldn't affect his artificial intelligence. The scene changed again, placing Gesicht in a field of flowers, facing someone echoing Pluto's name. Gesicht corrected him, stating he was Saad, not Pluto. Then the scene quickly shifted, and Saad was telling Abdullah that he had received news that he was killed in the war. Abdullah reassured him he was alive, but lamented that those people had taken away his wife Fatima, his daughter Lula, and his brother robot Murad. Abdullah grasped Saad's shoulders, urging him to save his country and avenge his family. Saad replied that revenge begets revenge. Later on, Abdullah asked Saad to allow him to implant his brain in the strongest bodies. They stood together in front of something, and Abdullah's face lit up as he told Saad that he loved him. Meanwhile, Baker ordered Gesicht to destroy the target, but Gesicht refused, saying he wasn't programmed to destroy a robot that didn't intend to attack. Baker yelled at him to destroy the target to resolve the case. Gesicht held firm on his refusal and requested a year-long leave. Baker informed him that he was developed as a detective robot and didn't have the right to resign. Gesicht requested a year off, then asked about Professor Hoffman's safety, confirming he had just reviewed the camera moments ago, then inquired about the robot dragging Hoffman. Gesicht continued, saying that Professor Hoffman was in danger. At that moment, someone called out for Gesicht, asking him to exchange the two hostages. Gesicht asked who was speaking, but the speaker commanded him to step away from Pluto in exchange for Hoffman's release. Gesicht moved away from Pluto despite Baker warning him that he was violating laws by acting without permission and would be severely punished. Once Gesicht moved away from Pluto, the robot dragging Hoffman suddenly collapsed. Police forces quickly rushed in and seized the professor. Meanwhile, Gesicht left the scene, telling Saad that his father didn't love him. Then, Gesicht contacted Helena, who told him she was ready to take a work break. He replied that he had finished his work too, and they would finally go to Japan. Helena remarked that he would join another mission, but he suggested that they apply to adopt a child. She reminded him they had already done that. Gesicht insisted that the laws had changed, and that robots had evolved, allowing them to find a suitable child now. He acknowledged that if they had kids, he wouldn't feel so lonely. Helena affirmed she was with him. Gesicht then ended the call, saying they would talk after he got home. He contacted Hoffman to check on him, who assured him he was fine and asked if he had been injured while being cornered by the creature. Gesicht replied no. Hoffman advised him to avoid facing the monster again since his body wasn't in the best shape, but they at least knew who was behind all these incidents. Gesicht informed him that Abdullah was the culprit but was upset by Dr. Oichanamezo's statements because he claimed the culprit was Dr. Guji. Hoffman instructed him to rest, for now since his body was made of zirconium and he was suffering from metallic fatigue. Another shock could be fatal for him. Gesicht expressed that he felt he had discovered the truth behind his dreams, so he might not be haunted by them again. He then vanished before clarifying anything to Hoffman. On the other side, military forces infiltrated an agricultural research facility in Zandam to conduct underground investigations. They arrived at the location where Gesicht had cornered the target, where Baker ordered them to destroy the target upon sight. At Europol, Schilling commanded Baker to call Gesicht. Baker called Gesicht, who was on his way to Amsterdam. Schilling informed him that he was experiencing a malfunction in his artificial intelligence and needed immediate maintenance to submit a report to the advisory committee. Gesicht questioned why he hadn't been punished, arguing he deserved execution for committing a crime. Why erase his memory instead of executing him? Gesicht then ended the call and returned to the same flower shop, requesting a bouquet for his wife. When the florist asked what type of flowers he wanted, he informed her that Saad was alive. The girl asked if Saad had done something bad. Gesicht assured her that Saad was not the culprit. He then picked up the bouquet of roses and continued walking until he crossed paths with the florist he met in the Persian kingdom. He then asked him why he was in the Netherlands. Suddenly, Gesicht was hit by distorted memories before he collapsed, thanks to a projectile from the robotic florist. Later, news broke out about the killing of a robotic agent the previous day in Old Amsterdam, where the slain investigator Gesicht was one of the most advanced robots in the world. A small robot holding a cluster gun was found collapsed near Gesicht's corpse, where Gesicht had sustained injuries from the same weapon weeks earlier. As events unfolded, Hoffman met Oichanamezo and introduced him to Helena, Gesicht's wife. Oichanamezo bowed to her and offered condolences. Helena told him that Gesicht had been looking forward to visiting Japan and had booked his trip before his death. At that moment, Oichanamezo's guards insisted they leave before the media spotted them, so Helena accompanied them while Oichanamezo and Hoffman lingered a bit longer. Oichanamezo asked Hoffman if he thought Gesicht's death was part of a series of robot destruction crimes. Hoffman warned that they were also in danger. Helena then turned and remarked that the air in Japan smelled just like soy sauce, just as Gesicht had told her. Afterwards, Helena strolled alongside Oichanamezo and Hoffman, and both noticed that Helena was mimicking humans by pretending to enjoy herself. Hoffman then commented that it seemed Gesicht's memory had been tampered with at Europol. Oichanamezo replied that didn't bode well. Hoffman informed him he had looked into the matter but found nothing. Then, Hoffman looked at Helena, saying he wanted to erase her memories for her sake, but she pleaded with him not to erase any memories of Gesicht. Later, Helena met Dr. Tenma at the inn, handing him Gesicht's memory chip, wondering if it would help identify the culprit. Helena expressed that she couldn't handle the immense sadness regarding her memories of Gesicht. Tenma advised her that humans cry in such situations and encouraged her to mimic humans by crying. Earlier, Professor Tenma recalled standing in front of a robotic body covered in a mask in the lab. Then Abdullah entered and asked him about the robot's condition. Tenma replied, stating, "If that robot were human, it would say it's dreaming." When Abdullah tried to lift the cover off the robot, he was stopped, explaining that the artificial skin mimics the personalities of 9.9 billion programmed features at an astonishing speed. He added that it couldn't possibly imagine how hideous its face would be. Abdullah remarked, "Perhaps creating a perfect robot is ultimately impossible." He then asked Tenma how to awaken the robot. Tenma answered, "There's one way, but it could turn the robot into a demon." At that moment, Okanamizu called out to Tenma and informed him that Helena, Gesicht's wife, had returned to her country and wished to meet her, as she was worried about Adam. Okanamizu continued, noting that scientists tend to acknowledge only technical results. But Helena's kindness is worth studying. She seems to be on the same level as Adam. As Tenma kept walking, Okanamizu told him that the National Parliament had set a date for Adam's official funeral. Tenma then entered a room and remembered Helena asking him, "Will Gesicht's death be in vain?" He responded, holding Gesicht's memory chip, "Humans call these things souls," assuring her that he would take care of her husband's spirit. Tenma then recalled telling Abdullah earlier that he would add unbalanced emotions to awaken the robot. Now, Tenma told himself that the balance deterioration was the simplest way to solve the randomness of 9.9 billion. He entered Adam's room, looking at Gesicht's memory chip, saying he accepted the idea of transforming it into a demon to awaken it. Meanwhile, Epsilon felt Gesicht's hatred before he died and wondered, who did Gesicht direct his hatred towards? Then another robot came and told Epsilon that he had a very powerful visitor. Later, the visitor introduced himself as Hogan, from the Defense Agency of the Ministry of Science. Hogan noticed that it was raining heavily in Epsilon's area. Epsilon shook hands with Hogan, who informed him that he had been assigned as his personal guard since he had become the next target after Detective Gesicht's murder. Hogan continued, stating that his strength wasn't on the same level as Epsilon's, but considering that his powers continued to draw from photon energy despite the heavy rain, he needed to take him to a safe place. Epsilon asked about the children, and Hogan replied that they couldn't be involved in this matter. Epsilon mentioned that it was his birthday today, and the children were planning a surprise party for him, which he was aware of. Later, the children organized organized a birthday party for Epsilon, giving him gifts, including a necklace, a hat, and a symbol resembling the sun, as he loved the sun dearly. A child told him that the sun would make him happy even on a rainy day like this. Epsilon replied that he was indeed happy. Nearby, Ms. Griffith mentioned that these children had lost their parents in the war, but to them, Epsilon was their son. On the other hand, Wozley sat alone. His friend asked to see the drawing he made for Epsilon. As Epsilon approached to view the picture, Wozley opened it, saying, "Bora ate it." Then Wozley began to sing. The giant made a southern pole in the desert. Then the giant unleashed a river of fire, summoned floating glaciers, and made the rain pour down until it caused a great flood. The giant swallowed the fire, the glaciers, and all the rain, then devoured the earth itself. When Wozley ended, the children laughed, thinking he had performed a song. Later, Epsilon sat alone for a moment. Hogan reminded him that they had to go, but Epsilon requested 5 more minutes. He then communicated with a robot named Arnold, asking if he had records of unusual atmospheric events in Persia 3 years ago. He showed Arnold Wozley's drawing, and asked about something resembling that image. Arnold quickly searched and responded, saying that 3 years ago in Persia, there was smoke typical of cannon fire on the battlefield. Arnold then asked Epsilon if some of the children he adopted came from that region. He quickly noticed something gigantic within the smoke, and Epsilon asked what it was. Arnold replied, saying that analyzing its data was impossible. Hogan urged Epsilon to hurry, so Epsilon said goodbye to the children, assuring them he would return later. The children asked what would happen to the rest of the birthday party. Epsilon told them he had a last-minute obligation and requested they be obedient until his return. Before leaving, Epsilon turned around and took one last look at Wozley. He recalled when he had previously gone to Persia, where an officer instructed him to watch his step as it was dark. Epsilon lit up the place, and then the officer informed his commander that he had brought Epsilon. The commander asked Epsilon to dim his light, and introduced himself as Brigadier Scott from the United Nations Forces. He inquired if Epsilon was the one who had refused to join the army, stating that Epsilon had a slender build despite being a robot. Scott then mocked Epsilon, calling him a coward, but at least he could help clean up after the war. Scott took Epsilon to the basement and told him his task was to melt away all the bodies of those robots, estimating that he would finish quickly thanks to his photon energy. Epsilon curiously asked Scott if he really had to do that to the robots. Scott replied that they were advanced robots from whom the AI chips had been removed, so they were just a pile of dolls. Epsilon objected, saying he heard that robot rights were acknowledged in Persia. He then asked Scott what had happened to the AI chips after they were removed. Scott confessed he had no idea, and ordered Epsilon to complete his work quickly. While Epsilon stood alone, Scott told him through his earpiece that the countdown for the operation had begun. However, Epsilon heard a human voice, stating that someone was still alive. Scott insisted they had checked the area, and that it was impossible for anyone to be alive, but Epsilon insisted on searching for the living body he had detected. He rushed outside to find the alive person, and discovered Wozley hiding among the wreckage. Epsilon asked him to come out, and Wozley emerged, terrified, repeating, "Bora." Soon after, Scott and his forces arrived, telling Epsilon they would take care of the boy, and that he just needed to complete his task, as their time was short. Epsilon returned to where the robots were and melted them away with his energy. Later, he encountered Commander Scott, who remarked to Epsilon that it had been a long time since they last met, but now he was a general. Then Scott praised Epsilon, saying he performed excellently. It had been like an explosion. Scott told Hogan that Epsilon possessed great power and it was foolish to think they would protect him. He added that this place resembled a fortress and was also a safe home. However, considering that Epsilon was the last advanced robot in the world, losing him would be catastrophic for the entire planet. Scott continued that according to the data they received from Detective Gesicht, the enemy's name was Pluto, but regarding his brain, it had been fitted with AI from another robot called Sod. At that moment, Epsilon asked Scott about the meaning of Bora and its relation to the destroyed robot bodies. Epsilon followed up with questions about why a Bora investigation committee was created in the first place, and why that committee found the robot corpses. He told Scott that his life was also in danger now, and that this was not the time to keep secrets. For Pluto's power was terrifying, and there was an even greater force waiting for them, the force that devours the Earth itself. Scott asked what he was talking about, and Hogan said it was the same song that the boy Wozley sang. On the other hand, Epsilon's children were singing the same song while playing, while Wozley sat alone, withdrawn. His companion told him everyone loved his song. One of the girls asked the robot Deacon why he was spacing out. Deacon pointed to the sky, and all the children gazed at his gesture, opening their eyes in astonishment. Meanwhile, Epsilon felt an imminent danger about to befall his children. He told General Scott that he needed to return to Australia immediately. Back with the children, the tornado began to form from the void, and thick black smoke started to rise amidst everyone's astonishment. Returning to Epsilon, he commanded the general to take his men and flee immediately. Scott replied that the defense system could respond to any attack. They were not thinking of fleeing because they weren't cowards like him. Epsilon grabbed Scott by the shoulders, insisting they had to get out now. Suddenly, a fiery force erupted, resembling an explosion, sending Epsilon and the robot Hogan into the air. When Epsilon insisted on returning to save the general and his men, Hogan told him it was too late because everyone had vanished. Epsilon said he was responsible for all this, but Hogan replied that the opportunity opportunities to target him over the past 3 months had been numerous, and it was very likely the general was also targeted as part of the Bora investigation assassinations. Epsilon looked toward the castle after it was destroyed, and noted that it resembled 2 horns, saying he needed to return to the children immediately. At that moment, Hogan questioned what kind of destructive power that was. Epsilon replied that it was the power of Bora and wondered what Bora really was. Was it just a puppet? Meanwhile, Oran was sitting in class while Principal Pan sat across from her. Oran then informed him that she had just detected 2 massive sorrow emissions in the world. The principal glanced at the story of Pinocchio that Oran was reading and mentioned to her that Pinocchio struggled to understand the human heart, but added that she possessed a heart larger than most humans. In contrast, Epsilon's children awaited the tornado's arrival, wondering if they should flee or stay. One child proposed staying home, guessing they would be safe as long as they remained indoors. The tornado intensified to a frightening degree, continuing to swirl and creating a dark storm, gradually closing in on the house until it collided with the glass, shattering it. The children gathered together in a corner, frightened. Suddenly, Hogan fell in front of them and asked them to huddle around him. All the kids dashed toward Hogan, who shielded them with his body and instructed them to duck down and protect their heads. Then, Epsilon appeared as a beam of light, piercing through the tornado until he disappeared inside it, creating a massive fireball. At that moment, Wesley recalled when Epsilon reached out to him for the first time, trying to save him. In the present, 2 enormous beams of light shot up into the sky, and the force shattered, falling to the ground in pieces resembling a mechanical frame. The tornado began to dissipate, and the children noticed 2 suns emerging. After that, Epsilon landed on the ground, and the children gathered around him, except for Wesley, who stood back and called Epsilon's name for the first time. Wesley thanked Epsilon profusely, and broke down in tears, prompting Epsilon to hug him in a touching moment. On the other side, Oran was focusing on one of the pages of the book, saying, "It's Pinocchio." The director asked her what she meant, and Oran replied, "The sad child, like Pinocchio, finds himself in a dark place like the belly of a whale wherever he goes. But he doesn't want to be a puppet, nor does he want to be controlled." Then Oran continued, "This child thinks he acts on his own, but it is hatred that controls him. Yet he is not the only one being manipulated. Geppetto is also in the same situation. He is just another puppet." Oran expressed her desire to speak to Geppetto more, but he had left. At the Ministry of Science, Tenma asked Ochanomizu if he could request a postponement for Adam's official funeral. Ochanomizu replied that he certainly could, and Tenma thanked him. Meanwhile, Epsilon's children were playing tag, and Griffith encouraged Wesley to run faster to avoid being caught by his friends. Wesley kept running until his buddy tackled him. At that moment, a woman asked if he was okay, while one of the children mentioned that Mr. Simon was coming. Mr. Simon approached and greeted Miss Griffith, commenting that the weather was nice today. He then inquired about Epsilon. The woman informed him that Epsilon was in a hearing. Somewhere, a meeting was taking place with Epsilon and several people. One of them asked Epsilon if he had defeated his opponent. Epsilon confirmed he had. The man remarked that he thought robots did not lie, but Epsilon insisted he had defeated his enemy. Another person asked why he had failed to protect General Scott, pointing out that everyone in the safe house had vanished in an instant. Epsilon explained that this attack had used a different weapon. The meeting members showcased the scattered parts found near Epsilon's orphanage after the battle, and asked Epsilon to take a look at them. Epsilon noted that it appeared to be the left arm of a robot from the Persian kingdom, a robot originally designed for environmental development that had been repurposed for military use. At that moment, someone spoke to Epsilon, mentioning they knew his anti-war views but were worried he might become too lenient with the enemy again. Epsilon replied, stating that no matter how many times they fought, the enemy would never be his opponent. Meanwhile, Simon was meeting with Ms. Griffith and told her she surely knew what was being said about that orphanage and the whispers about Epsilon, the robot, being a father to human children. He continued that the Children's Services Agency didn't have a problem with a prominent human like her working in childcare, but the issue was Epsilon. Griffith responded that Epsilon loved those children more than any human. Simon countered that it was still better for humans to take care of those children. Simon looked at his companion, Mr. Johansson, and mentioned that Mr. Johansson was willing to participate in the child's care. Johansson assured he would ensure a happy life for the child who would become his son. Simon explained that Mr. Johansson was one of the most prominent figures in Oslo, to which Johansson added that he and his wife had visited the place several times and were determined to help Wesley, hoping for a positive response regarding him. Griffith then asked him why he chose Wesley over all the other children. Suddenly, the assistant knocked, saying she had brought Wesley. Johansson approached Wesley and attempted to speak with him, but Wesley was scared and clung to the assistant's clothes. Johansson asked him if he had ever seen snow, and just as Griffith was about to tell Johansson that Wesley didn't want to go with him, Simon whispered to her that Johansson was willing to pay a large amount for the orphanage. He then asked her if she would deprive a child of the chance to be adopted by ideal parents just because he didn't want to go. Later, Epsilon landed at his orphanage, where the children welcomed him and ran toward him. Griffith instructed them to let Epsilon rest because he was certainly tired. Then Epsilon noticed Wesley's absence. When he asked about him, the children told him that Wesley had gone with the wealthy man. Epsilon shouted at Griffith, questioning what was happening and where Wesley was. The assistant replied that he had gone to Oslo, while Griffith stated that there was no other option. Somewhere, Johansson was ordering Wesley to keep walking behind him, asking how many times he would stop. Wesley followed Johansson slowly, and Johansson informed him that his job would be over as soon as he brought him through this door, instructing him not to become a hassle. Meanwhile, Hogan was telling Epsilon that he had received the tracking results, and that Wesley had been taken to the Vigilant Castle in Oslo, but the man who took Wesley, Johansson, was nowhere to be found. On the other side, Johansson opened the door and brought brought Wesley inside, telling someone that he had brought the boy. When Wesley entered and saw Abdullah's face, he was shocked, stepping back and repeating in fear, "Bora." Abdullah placed his hand over Wesley's mouth, urging him not to scream loudly, or else he would be punished. Then Abdullah dragged Wesley with him, saying that he was a bad boy for seeing Bora, but Epsilon would come to save him. Abdullah forced Wesley to see Pluto, causing Wesley to faint. Abdullah then continued speaking to the beast, telling it that he had traveled that distance for its sake, and there was no room for failure. He demanded that it kill Epsilon because he was the last one left, promising that everything would end afterward. Abdullah assured the beast that he would win even with one arm. Epsilon later donned the armor he received during the Asia War, and told Hogan he had no need for it at the time because he had refused conscription. He then took Hogan with him, saying that Wesley's life was in danger and the army could mobilize at any moment. He suspected that he was the target. Hogan asked why Epsilon hadn't eliminated his opponent, guessing that he definitely had the chance to kill him. Epsilon didn't answer, and told Hogan he would go alone to avoid more casualties, but Hogan insisted on going with him, saying he would protect Wesley. At the Vigilant Castle, Abdullah told Pluto that Epsilon would arrive at any moment, and ordered him to finish things by sunrise. At that moment, Wesley, who was tied up, shouted and began repeating, "Bora!" Abdullah tried to hit Wesley with a stick, but Pluto broke the stick. Abdullah asked, surprised, if he was challenging his father. Since when had he acted this way with his creator? Abdullah then firmly told Pluto that he could return to his original body as soon as this battle was over. Meanwhile, Epsilon and Hogan reached the castle. Epsilon said he sensed Wesley was nearby, and therefore he would enter the castle. Hogan informed him that he was a photon-powered robot, so he needed to wait until sunrise. But Epsilon insisted he had to rescue Wesley as quickly as possible. Epsilon sneaked into the castle, followed by Hogan. As soon as they stood before Pluto's room, Pluto pierced the door and grabbed Epsilon by the tail, slamming him against the wall. Epsilon then ordered Hogan to save Wesley immediately, and an immense energy surged from Epsilon as Pluto lifted him by his tail. Epsilon mentioned that his energy was starting to run low, while Hogan immediately entered to check on Wesley. At the same time, Abdullah ordered Pluto to eliminate Epsilon, but while Pluto was cornering Epsilon, he kept repeating, "The boy." Epsilon asked if he meant Wesley. At that moment, Hogan called out to Epsilon and reassured him that Wesley was safe. Epsilon replied that Wesley was safe and asked Pluto if Sod was inside him, asking what Bora was. But the sun began to rise, and Abdullah yelled at Pluto to finish off Epsilon. Then Pluto asked Epsilon for help. On the other side, Oran stood before Tobio Tenma's grave, and suddenly Tenma appeared and said to Oran that she was the one who left the flowers on his son's grave. Oran told him she was Adam's little sister. Tenma, astonished, replied, "A robot visiting a grave? Amazing." He continued by saying that Oran was an artistic masterpiece of Okanamazu, and asked if she knew how Tobio was in heaven. Oran responded that she didn't know heaven, but she knew how sad it was. He then asked if she understood the depths of the heart, to which Oran said she sensed two feelings from somewhere far away, one of them a terrible sadness emanating from two sources. On the other hand, the sun slowly spread around as Abdullah shouted at Pluto to eliminate Epsilon. Meanwhile, Pluto questioned Epsilon why he hadn't killed him the last time and why he hadn't done it now. Epsilon replied that the waves that had emanated from him earlier told him he was sad, prompting Pluto to ask him to kill him now. Then, massive flames and blue light energy surged from Epsilon at the same moment. Pluto told Epsilon to use his photon energy to dissolve him and begged him to kill him. Then the scene changed rapidly, and Epsilon was shocked to find himself taken to a field of flowers with Sod standing before him. Epsilon told him they needed to find his original body to restore the AI to its original form. Epsilon extended his hand to Sod, who wept and told him Bora must be coming. On the other side, the sun disappeared again, and before Hogan and Wesley appeared a massive storm of black smoke that looked like a whirlwind, enveloping Wesley and Hogan. At that moment, Epsilon shouted, questioning what was happening, and surrounded Wesley and Hogan with his photon energy to protect them from the tornado. Meanwhile, Dr. Tenma took Oran to see her brother Adam. Back to Epsilon, Pluto severed his head. At that moment, Epsilon saw jumbled memories of his children, and Adam finally awakened and opened his eyes. Oran asked him if he recognized her, then called out to Dr. Tenma, who told her he had added imbalanced feelings to Adam and was only waiting for him to awaken. But when Tenma began analyzing Adam's data, he was surprised by strange numbers. Oran informed him that a massive surge of sadness had appeared suddenly before Adam awoke. On the other side, Hogan embraced Wesley, preventing him from looking toward Epsilon, who had transformed into scattered beams of light. Then the morning sun returned, and the giant shadow, along with Pluto, disappeared, while Wesley held Epsilon's hands that had protected him and Hogan during the battle by releasing photon energy, and Wesley continued to cry. At that moment, Hogan saluted, saying that Epsilon was not a coward avoiding conscription, but a brave warrior. Meanwhile, Tenma left after telling Oran that she certainly read many books, so she was good at poetic expression, but didn't really understand emotions. When Oran tried to stop him, she was startled by Adam rising. She asked him if he knew her, and Adam called out for Epsilon and Gesicht, saying there was a crack and the earth was going to shatter. In Eden National Park, a tour guide explained to a group of people that long ago, in the land of Monokachi, there lived a tribe called Nanabu. The Nanabu people were peaceful and disliked fighting, until one day another tribe arrived with gold on ships. They told the Nanabu tribe that whoever possessed gold would be happy. The Nanabu traded some of their horses for gold, and rumors about the gold spread quickly. In no time, the Nanabu gave up all their horses, along with their homes and treasured lands, based on the advice of the tribe with the gold. Eventually, the Nanabu lost everything, and migrated to Mount Manabanzo, where they started throwing themselves into the volcano one by one. Their souls transformed into a great giant who has been sleeping in the volcano ever since. The legend suggests that this giant will awaken again someday in Eden National Park. After the guide finished telling the legend, she informed the group that they would be moving on to the local reserve. Elsewhere, where a puppet sat in a chair, the leader of Thracia declared that their plan had been completed exactly as they intended. He looked at pictures of the most advanced robots in the world and stated that everyone had died, and now the town of Thracia would prosper forever. In Eden National Park, the guide told the group that they were in front of Tsitsi Mar, the tribal chief, whose role was to ward off evil. Someone asked the guide if she could translate what the chief was chanting, so she began to translate his words. The chief was repeating that there was an evil spirit lurking below the ground, and that spirit would unleash its wrath upon the world. In the Ministry of Science, the researchers told Ochanomizu that they had completed the transfer and were ready to face whatever came next. Ochanomizu, accompanied by his researchers, entered the monitoring room and asked them what they expected to happen after Adam awakened. He then inquired whether Dr. Tenma had been located. When one researcher replied negatively, Ochanomizu wondered what Dr. Tenma had done with Adam. Later, Oran mentioned that Tenma had added a specific program to Adam. Ochanomizu asked her which program it was, and Oran continued by saying that she felt a great sadness explode somewhere in the world when Adam awakened. Suddenly, one of the researchers rushed in to tell Ochanomizu that Adam wanted a pen, but when they gave him one, he created chaos. As Ochanomizu ran to see the mess Adam had made, Oran followed him. However, Ochanomizu ordered Oran to be taken out of the monitoring room. Oran began to scream, asking what Adam was writing, while one researcher questioned Ochanomizu about the equation Adam was writing. Ochanomizu replied that it was a plan for a proton bomb, an equation designed to destroy the Earth. At that moment, the researcher was stunned, while Adam finished writing the equation and dropped the pen. Ochanomizu then stated that Adam had completed writing a formula that would annihilate the Earth. On the other side, Tenma went to visit Brow, who said it was a great honor to be visited by the famous robot scientist. Tenma mentioned that Adam had awakened. Brow asked if Adam had sent him a morning greeting from the sun to his father. Tenma replied he was astonished because he, too, had heard that information. Brow said that when an artificial intelligence like Adam wakes up, everyone else notices it. Tenma then told Brow that he wanted to ask him a question, and Brow informed him that he would listen if Tenma agreed to repair him. Meanwhile, Ochanomizu was trying to analyze the data obtained from Adam, stating that he would no longer rely on Dr. Tenma's help because he would restore Adam to his original state. Suddenly, a researcher burst in to tell Ochanomizu that they had an emergency. Adam had escaped. Later, Ochanomizu observed how Adam had penetrated the walls, and incredulously exclaimed that those walls were supposed to be impenetrable. How could Adam have escaped? One of the researchers then asked where Adam had gone, prompting Ochanomizu to order him to get the army's assistance to track Adam using his GPS system. However, Ochanomizu soon pinpointed Adam's location himself, stating he was in Kodanshita, which was not far from them. Then, Ochanomizu remembered when Tenma had previously told him that he awakened the perfect robot by adding unbalanced emotions. He also recalled Oran's words when she informed him that Dr. Tenma had added a program to Adam. On the other side, Brow asked Tenma if he had added Gigisht's memory to Adam, especially the data concerning his last moments. Elsewhere, Adam was walking in the rain. In the same place where the puppet was trapped, the puppet told the leader of Thracia that Adam was alive and filled with an enormous amount of hatred. The man replied that robots were incapable of hatred. The puppet then asked him if he thought robots could not hate or cry and did not understand the feeling of hatred. Meanwhile, Ochanomizu was running through the streets searching for Adam, while Adam stood in the rain in front of a barricade. Adam swiftly grasped the barricade in his hand, at which point he remembered a woman asking police officers to save her son. At that moment, investigator Gigisht arrived and showed his badge to the other investigators, who immediately took him aside, saying the perpetrator did not want to negotiate and had set up a barricade at a distance in front of them. Gigisht asked about the perpetrator's weapons, and the investigator replied that the perpetrator had a military-grade recoilless rifle. Gigisht then approached the barricade, and suddenly the perpetrator fired a shot, which Gigisht narrowly dodged. Gigisht charged ahead, stopping just a few steps away from the perpetrator, aiming his weapon at him. The perpetrator threatened to kill him if he came closer, but Gigisht spoke to the kidnapped child Kurt, assuring him that he was an artificial police officer and that his gun would only kill the villain. He promised the child he would not get hurt, but urged him not to move. Kurt began to cry, and the perpetrator shouted that he would blow the child's head off. Gigisht then ordered Kurt to think of the people he loved, and the child started repeating, "Mom, Dad." Gigisht then fired his shot, and the perpetrator fell to the ground while Gigisht jumped to save Kurt, catching him in his arms and saying he had done great. The child immediately ran to hug his parents. After the day ended, the scrap collector asked Gigisht to step aside so he could begin his work. The worker complained about the chaos the perpetrator had caused, and explained that he would have to check for recyclable parts before crushing everything. He then began lifting parts of the robots, stating he might make a lot of money if he sold those parts to a robot hospital. Suddenly, Gigisht noticed something, and asked the crane operator to drop it. Upon inspection, he found a robot inside that was moving, but the crane operator held up the robot, claiming its condition was worse than being alive, and that it was an old model with nothing usable left. However, Gesicht took it from the worker and told him he would give him the entire robot for 500 Zeus. Later, Gesicht carried the robot in his arms and called Helena, saying he was on his way home. He has a surprise for her, and then the events unfold. Helena and Gesicht begin to watch the robot as it walks. Helena asks Gesicht if this child is really theirs. Gesicht tells her that he is their child and that, thanks to him, he finally understands the meaning of life. Then the robot calls them parents. At that moment, Helena says they need to name him. Gesicht decides to name him Robita. Later, someone kills the robot Robita, steals it, and throws the bag in front of Gesicht while apologizing for his mistake. Gesicht, however, shoots the assailant and kills him. Events continue to unfold, and a memory of Gesicht surfaces, where he tells Adolf that he feared only himself after learning the feeling of hatred. Then the scene shifts, showing Gesicht being struck by the flower seller robot's projectile, causing him to fall to the ground, exclaiming that there's no point in hatred. Suddenly, Adam snaps back to reality after the memory presentation of Gesicht ends, and at that moment, Okanamizu approaches him, calling out with concern. Adam reassures him that he is fine now, and Okanamizu hugs him tightly, saying that hatred has disappeared. On the other side, Tenma tells Brao that one might think hatred has vanished. However, hatred and sadness never truly disappear. They continue to smolder quietly. Brao agrees with him completely, and asks Tenma about Abdullah's whereabouts. Brao says there's no need to search for Abdullah, because he will come to him himself. After that, Tenma leaves Brao, gets into a car, and tells the driver to head to the airport. Suddenly, the driver turns around and shines a red light, almost laser-like, in Tenma's eyes, causing him to lose consciousness immediately. Meanwhile, Okonomizu, Tawash, and Nakamura gather around Adam, who informs them that Dr. Tenma implanted a memory chip of Gesicht inside him, and that he will reveal the truth about what Gesicht discovered in his investigation. Adam continues, saying that Darius XIV planned to transform his desert kingdom into fertile land when he was a dictator in the Persian kingdom. He ordered Professor Abdullah to create a robot to change the soil, and this plan was called Project Bora. Tawash then remarks that Bora was not a weapon of mass destruction. Adam confirms this, explaining that Project Bora faced many setbacks, as every preliminary robot model created by Abdullah failed and was discarded. These are the same models that Professor Okonomizu and the others found in the robot graveyard. Then, Professor Abdullah had an idea to complete Project Bora, realizing he needed a capable assistant whose abilities surpassed that of humans, another robot with more advanced artificial intelligence. To achieve this goal, a certain scientist was invited to the Persian kingdom. Okonomizu clarifies that this scientist is Dr. Tenma. Meanwhile, Dr. Tenma awakens, bound in restraints. Abdullah appears and tells him that he heard about Adam's revival. Tenma asks if Abdullah kidnapped him to lure Adam, but Abdullah releases Tenma's restraints, saying it's no longer necessary. Tenma inquires why he brought him there, and Abdullah points to something large. Tenma, surprised, asks if that is Pluto, to which Abdullah replies, it is Bora, a masterpiece created by a genius scientist named Guji. Abdullah expresses his plan to implant his brain into Bora, thus creating the most advanced robot in the world, and that only Professor Tenma can achieve this. At that moment, Tenma looks at Abdullah silently. On the other side, Adam reveals that Professor Abdullah lost his entire family in the war, which is why he hated the world. Adam continues, saying that Professor Abdullah himself was killed in the war. Tawash and Nakamura respond, stating it's impossible since they met him recently. Back with Tenma, he tells Abdullah that he is neither human nor a person. Abdullah insists he is closer to a robot since he lost most of his body in the war. Tenma reminds him that he is a robot, emphasizing he has known him for a long time because he was the one who created him when Abdullah requested him to produce a perfect robot. Abdullah laughs at this. Tenma goes on, stating that the intelligence of this perfect robot was so advanced that it never awakened. He recalls the war in the Persian kingdom and how he received news of Professor Abdullah's death during the bombing of Timothy. The officer at that time showed a recording of Professor Abdullah while they tried to save him from beneath the rubble, where Abdullah tells Tenma that there is a memory chip containing a copy of a specific part of his brain. He urges the officer to hand over that chip to him. Tenma then receives the chip from the officer, realizing it contains Abdullah's hatred. Later on, Tenma adds this chip to the perfect robot at Abdullah's request, and indeed, this operation succeeds. The robot awakens with Abdullah's face. On the other side, Okonomizu, Nakamura, and Tawash understand Abdullah's true nature based on Adam's words. Returning to Abdullah, he tells Tenma he is lying. Tenma points out that the most advanced artificial intelligence can also lie to others and even to itself. He confronts Abdullah, stating that the genius scientist Guji does not exist, and that he himself is Guji. Adam then explains to the others that Guji is Abdullah. He is a robot born with a dual personality. Back to Tenma, he tells Abdullah that he does not need him for the implantation process, as his artificial intelligence has already been transferred to other robots. Abdullah collapses, accusing Tenma of lying. Tenma tells him that the whole world understands his suffering, and now it's time to stop him. Professor Tenma begins to shut down Abdullah, but as he starts working on that, Abdullah collapses, releasing numerous insects from within him. Tenma then realizes that Abdullah's electronic brain is missing. On the other side, Adam comments, Bora is no longer a robot designed to produce plant life, it has become a weapon of mass destruction. Tawash urges that they must inform everyone immediately. Adam informs him that it's too late because the entire Earth will now be destroyed. At Dr. Tenma's location, a powerful sandstorm arises, scattering bright fragments. Simultaneously, the military court session 108 convenes. Before Darius can take the oath, everyone starts feeling the gradual buildup of an earthquake. Darius remembers when he was on the verge of suicide, and Abdullah prevented him, claiming that Pluto was finally complete. He will take revenge on them, and also accuse them before the Bora Investigation Committee. Darius responds that Thracia caused considerable harm. Meanwhile, Thracia's president is informed that the robot Arnold predicts an imminent volcanic eruption. The president states that they will save many lives thanks to this robot. Arnold replies that the volcanic explosion will occur in Eden National Park. The area around Eden Park is inspected, revealing a massive pool of lava 8 kilometers below the surface, containing 3,000 cubic kilometers of lava. The president then asks Arnold about the volcanic eruption rate. Arnold explains that it erupts once every 5,000 years, and the last explosion was 200 years ago. If it erupts, it will eject 100 million tons of ash and cinders every hour, destroying areas within a radius of several hundred kilometers. Arnold details the aftermath of the eruption, confirming that most biological life forms will die within a few months. Suddenly, the judge reaches out to the president, presenting a broadcast from Darius's trial, where Darius warns of a massive bomb ready to explode beneath Thracia. The Thracia president rushes to the puppet immediately, where he is informed that the robots will survive the explosion, and so will 10% of the Earth's population. He is told that these survivors would be a gift to him. Meanwhile, Arnold contacts Okanamizu, informing him that a proton bomb, if it continues moving toward Eden Park, will trigger the volcanic eruption. Okanamizu analyzes the data and predicts that the explosion will happen within 72 hours. Arnold adds that this time coincides with the 4-year anniversary of Professor Abdullah and his family's loss. Arnold further explains, Bora can only be stopped when it approaches the surface for the volcanic explosion, but Adam is the only robot capable of stopping it. Adam volunteers, saying he will take care of it, but he needs to go somewhere first. Then Adam goes to meet Brow and asks him about the next threat. They engage in a brief discussion, which concludes, and just before Adam leaves, Brow requests permission to touch him. Somewhere, a couple tells Helena that they have always dreamed of living in a house like that. Helena bids them farewell, saying she will meet them later regarding the garden layout. She continues on her way when Adam suddenly crosses her path, telling her that Gesicht is inside him. Adam explains that he was able to return to life thanks to Gesicht. Helena then hugs him, and Adam reassures her that Gesicht always thought of her until the last moment of his life. He tells her she won't be alone, even after he is gone. Helena cries and asks, "Are you trying to cheer me up?" Adam replies that robots don't lie. Helena said she recently realized that she and Gesicht had lost memories of a certain period in their lives, but she wondered if Gesicht had regained those memories. Adam replied that Gesicht hadn't recovered any lost memories. As he said goodbye, Helena asked him to visit her again. After Adam left, Helena claimed that Adam had just lied to her about Gesicht's memories. Later, Adam visited Gesicht's grave, stating that he paid his respects to everyone, as it might be his end. Afterwards, Adam set off to stop Bora and quickly arrived at his destination, only to be confronted by Pluto. Adam charged at Pluto, crashing him into the wall and causing destruction. The roles then reversed as Pluto extended his tails and pinned Adam against the wall, trying to break through with his tails. However, Adam caught him, declaring he would destroy him. Adam broke a part of Pluto, informing him that his hatred was stronger than Pluto's. He reminded Pluto that Mont Blanc loved the forests, and North loved music and didn't want to fight. In contrast, he had killed everyone. Pluto attempted to crush Adam in his grip, but Adam opened his hand and told him that Brando loved his family and that Hercules and Brando were friends, despite being rivals, and neither wanted to die. Even Epsilon was against the war and refused conscription. At that moment, Pluto wrapped his tail around Atum, who continued, stating that Epsilon fostered war orphans and loved them. Adam then lured Pluto down and knocked him to the ground, saying that inside him were Gesicht's feelings and hatred. On the other side, Oran declared that she would go stop Adam, as Pluto still had a good side within him, which was why he wasn't using his whirlwind. But Director Ban held her back, saying they couldn't do anything now. Meanwhile, Okanamizu was on the plane trying to catch up with Adam, as the machines had located him 75 kilometers away. At that moment, Adam was about to deliver a final blow to Pluto, and saw the memories of all the machines that had died. Ultimately, he saw Gesicht stating that hatred was futile, causing Adam to collapse to the ground. Pluto then rose, crying, and Adam asked, "Why are your tears falling?" To which Pluto replied he didn't know the reason. Later, the two lay beside each other, and Pluto said, "Humans say if you wish upon a shooting star, your dreams will come true." Adam asked, "If you wished for something?" Pluto confirmed, and Atum replied, "He wished for the same thing you wished for." Then Atum announced, "It's time to go," and shot up, falling into the volcano. On the other side, Okonomizu was warned that Eden Park was in danger, but he insisted on landing the plane. At that moment, Tenma contacted Okonomizu, suggesting that Adam might have killed Pluto, but the real problem was Bora, whom even Adam couldn't stop since Bora bore all of Abdullah's hatred that had overcome others. Tenma concluded that this land was doomed. Okonomizu reassured him that even if humanity faced death, they would never lose hope. Before Ochanomizu descended from the plane, he told Tenma that he was a genius scientist, as he created Gugu just as he created Atum. Meanwhile, weather monitors were tracking earthquakes, stating they were a result of the unstable geological crust in Eden Park. At the same time, the doll told the president that she would protect him, but he would be her slave for the rest of his life. Okonomizu and Nakamura arrived at the volcano's crater, with Okonomizu saying that Atum was trying to disable Bora and the anti-proton bomb, but he feared Atum's body might melt in the process. Meanwhile, Adam was informing Bora that Gesicht taught him that hatred was futile and needed to end. Bora then launched multiple shards at Atum, who realized he had to disable the bomb in 5 minutes before his body started to melt. Suddenly, Pluto grabbed Adam's body in his hands, claiming he would protect him. Bora began to attack them, but Pluto was evading his strikes, instructing Adam to send him the bomb's blueprint. Once Atum complied, Pluto declared that his wish was to turn the earth into fields of flowers. He asked Atum to tell Oran he was grateful to her for drawing with him, separating his fist from the rest of his body. Then Pluto's hand shot upwards, carrying Atum inside it, before his arm returned to him after rescuing Atum from the volcano's mouth. Atum fell to the ground as Ochanomizu and Nakamura rushed toward him, while Atum kept repeating Sahad's name. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted within the volcano, causing Adam to pull Ochanomizu and Nakamura away immediately. They then noticed that the sky appeared to be patterned like a field of flowers. Adam exclaimed, "Sahad saved the earth." On the other side, the doll told the president of Thracia that the explosion had subsided, but she could devise another plan. The president begged her not to do that. Suddenly, the robotic arm of Brow emerged from somewhere after finally being freed, grabbing the neck of the president of Thracia before stabbing him, revealing that the doll was actually the robot Brow. Meanwhile, Adam asked Okonomizu about hatred, to which Okonomizu expressed his hope that one day, hatred would disappear.